Welcome everyone to the AURI and Food Finance Institute short course, our part 2 of our meat and poultry processing finance boot camp with an emphasis with our meat processors and entrepreneurs. So for today, we're really going to explore regardless of the type of project you're working on, looking and leaving this session with a clear understanding of what you need to do to fund, buy, or sell your meat processing business. I am Laura Bachmeyer with AURI, the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, and I am the Business Development Director of Meat and will be your moderator for today. So this program today really aims to actively engage all of our participants in the food and egg industry, specifically local and regional meat and poultry processing, to help our processors and supply chain to improve the competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs, excuse me. And really through this, really focus on our value chain and value-added agricultural. So again, as I mentioned before, we are pleased to be collaborating with the Food Finance Institute today, where their mission is to make sophisticated financial technical assistance available to every growing food, beverage, and value-added farm enterprise. Some housekeeping items. Today, this event is being recorded, and afterwards we'll be able to privately share to attendees that are participating today. Today, we want to make sure that it's an interactive presentation and discussion with all parties that are attending. So we do have the capability to allow everyone to speak, and you can easily utilize that if you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will be able to raise your hand, and we'll be sure to make sure that your question or response is able to be shared with everyone. But as well, you do have the option within the chat function to provide responses as well, if you are more comfortable with that. So to get started today, I also just want to share a bit of information about today's presenter, Tara Johnson, the former founder of FFI. And Tara is a serial entrepreneur whose mission is to create the next generation of resilient food and farm businesses. She is also the founder of Tara's Way, and she'll give some great examples of her experience with being the founder there. And she participated in the full arc of creating and selling a successful investor finance food company. Again, as I mentioned, she is the founder of the Food Finance Institute and Edible Alpha at the University of Wisconsin System. She is a frequent speaker, teacher, and financial consultant to sustainable food and farming businesses and social venture funds and investors. I could go on and on about Tara's background and just her wealth of knowledge that she provides to the agricultural sector and businesses and in finance. So with that, let's all welcome Tara to the discussion and get started with this workshop today. So I'll pass it over to you, Tara.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much. One of the things that the downside of been in this work for a long time is your bio starts getting really long. So I'm glad we've sort of abbreviated it. It's great to be here with y'all today. I know this is, you're all super busy in your work lives, and to carve out this amount of time is tough. So I appreciate y'all doing that, and hopefully we'll add a lot of value in this 4 hours we have together. And as Laura said, they are recording this too. So if for some reason you have to step away and come back or something like that, we totally understand that. This is a different Zoom experience than you're used to. Those of you who use Zoom at work, right? When you're in a meeting, you see everybody. I don't see everybody here when it's in webinar format like this. So Laura was saying that we do want this to be interactive though. And so Be sure to raise your hand if we're plowing along and you have questions or things to share. The other thing I'll tell you is that the chat, so definitely I want you all to open your chat. And I say that because for two reasons. The first is that when I first started doing webinars and things online, I'm kind of old school, right? And I used to do these all in person. And now 90% of them are not in person anymore, which is interesting. But you move out of in person, right? You can tell if somebody's off, not paying attention, right? And so you take that mindset over and you're teaching online. But then what I realized is young people in particular are used to having multiple things going on their screen at once. That's kind of like how your brains work. And so in some ways you're more engaged if you can have other things going. And then I realized, wow, chat is a way to do that for people. So I'm actually encouraging you to use chat during the session. And at times I'm going to ask you to post things into chat. So it's a way that a larger group like us can share with each other. I'll also at times we are going to open that up to the ability for you to raise hands and get called on. And that's how you can we can give you the mic basically, so you can ask questions or share your experiences. Because I think it's a really vital part of the learning that you're engaged with it this way. I've been watching those of you who posted, thank you, your names and also where what organization you're from, and your roles. If that's also super helpful to me. So if you haven't done that yet, please do. The reason is that there's such a wide range of things that are meat businesses, right? And so when I talk and my experiences working with hundreds of food companies over the years, actually, plus my own experiences in my own business, I can target it when I know who's in the audience and what kind of businesses you have. So it's really helpful. So please, if you haven't already posted, please go ahead and do in the chat. Let me know your name and what your business is. So it's super helpful. All right. So with that, I want to get started. I should say we're going to have at least one break. I'm here at home like a lot of us, right? I have a couple of dogs. Every once in a while, one of them will have an emergency and I may say, you know what, we're going to have an early break because I have to go. I'm not saying that will happen, but I'm just warning you. It's just part of this working at home thing, I'm afraid. Yeah. All right, cool. With that, building financially viable meat processing businesses. Why, when we're doing finance, like why am I going to talk about businesses and business model stuff today? And foundationally, why I'm doing this is that if you don't have your business model act together, you're never going to make money at your business, right? And people want to hear and see the evidence that you have your business model act together in order to fund you. So what happens when you either haven't really thought it through or you have thought it through, but you haven't gotten it documented correctly, is that investors and bankers won't be interested in funding you. And they don't say to you, well, we're not because you should have thought about X, Y, and Z. They just say no. And they never tell you why. And so you're kind of left with like, geez, is this even possible? Like, what is this? And it feels personal. Like it's a nasty thing to go through. Raising money is tough. It's just tough. So, so much of your success is tied to the degree to which you've done this work that we're going to go through together today. So that's why we're going to spend all this time. It is foundational to raising money. So why this workshop? Why this webinar? well, there really isn't a book for this. Like, you look around and can I find a book, or isn't there something online? And maybe it is, but it's in little pieces online and it's disconnected. Like there really isn't a place where you can get all this workshop, all the material we're going to cover in this workshop. There really isn't a place to go get this. So what you're going to notice in this is a lot of my slides can be pretty busy. And the reason I do that is that you guys can you have access to that after this is over. And that kind of becomes your book, right? And I'm not going to read every slide. I'm going to be talking from them, and that's intentional. So what did I learn? So a little bit about me. If you all didn't hear the last time Laura did part of my introduction, I am going to be talking a lot about my experience doing the Tara's Whey company, because I had to build a processing facility in order to do that. And I did a whey protein plant, and whey protein, we were the first organic and goat whey protein in the country and the first plant to be able to do that. And whey is a very capital intensive business. It's way more capital intensive than meat processing. So I raised my money in 2007 and 8. And way back then, a whey plant, the smallest whey plant we could possibly build, cost over 12 million. Now it would probably be over 20, right? So I had to raise a total of about $14 million to start that business. And I had no sales. Isn't that interesting? Like, holy crap. So I really learned a lot in that process about a lot of things. But a couple of things that are really salient for you guys. Number one, processing businesses are really hard to capitalize and manage profitably, right? Because you didn't have a choice. It's not like software where you put all this together and then you sell, incremental units. Like, well, no, we got to build our meat processing facility and buy all the equipment and take on a whole bunch of debt that is going to need to be serviced, or we bring in equity from investors who are going to want to return. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure to get that facility full in order to be profitable. And that's tough, right? So it's a hard thing. The other thing about this is that investors really don't understand processing businesses. They're kind of terrified of them, a lot of them. So it's difficult to raise equity financing. Debts, on the other hand, banks kind of like meat process. Well, they like processing. They are a little skittish about meat processing because of the historic, failures of small plants, basically. So they're very conservative about it. So you're in an environment like that, and then you guys come in with good ideas and things that you want to do with your current business or a new business, and you run into all this problem, right? And how do we get out of that? And how do you get around it? How do you change the outcome? Well, preparation is a big part of it. Like doing all this pre-work that I'm going to be talking about today is really critical, because it helps you think through the business. It helps you be much more credible when you talk to other people about the business. And then you get really clear, right? And so you can say, that elevator pitch kind of thing. You get to the point where you can say, yep, I need $1.2 million to build my plant. I'm going to start up and I'm going to be at cash flow positive in 2.7 years or whatever the numbers are, right? Like you just rip it off. And then they ask questions about, well, what are you going to do about wastewater? And you go, well, actually we got to pre-treat it. And, the answers to all these things. That makes a really big difference when you're trying to do this. So that's a lot of what today is about. So what are we going to cover? Business model related stuff, right? To get to a processing business of any kind, right? It's just the processing, or it could be a meat market too, right? But there's bricks and mortar is the point. We're going to go back to square one and look at your business model. We're going to talk about differentiation. We're going to talk about the importance of target marketing, so you're not trying to sell to everybody. We're going to talk about your brand and your brand promise. We're going to talk about quantifying your production process, like, and documenting what you want to do in the plant from a production perspective. Why is that important? Because if you don't know that, then you don't know what equipment you need. You don't know what kind of building you need. You don't know how big it needs to be. You don't know where it's going to be. Like, all of that should be driven by your production process. So then we're going to talk about developing a building specification. We're going to talk about issues around siting things in meat processing. We're going to talk about staffing, because staffing is a huge issue right now for meat processing all over the country. And then we're going to talk about how we pull this all together. So those are all the topics. And guess what? You, as a business owner of a meat processing facility, a current one, who wants to improve or expand, or a person on this who is aspiring to have a meat processing facility, you need to think about all this. And then if you have a facility, this is so interesting. If you have a facility that you want to sell, guess what the buyer is concerned about? Same stuff. So this foundational stuff is just critical. It doesn't matter what stage of your business you're in. So, and there are particular things in meat processing that make some of this really critical. So we'll be talking about all that. Why is meat processing getting all this attention? Well, we all know what happened during COVID, and that kind of made everybody realize that there are only 5 meat plants in the world, and that kind of thing. Not 5 plants, but 5 big brands, right? And how vulnerable we all are because of that. And then everybody said, well, maybe we need to have a local meat industry again. And then people are looking around going, oh, there's not a lot around here. So this map shows where small farms with cattle are. It also shows where small processors are, because those two kind of link together, right? And here I am in Wisconsin, and we are blessed with quite a lot of meat processing plants. I think we're somewhere around, last data I saw was 156, and there's a little flux around in that, but that's a lot. Like I do work. I have this boot camp that I take on the road, and I work with entrepreneurs in various food things around the country, and a lot of meat people. And guess what? There's nowhere. Like, look at Montana, how big that is, and how few meat processing facilities there are, right? There are 2 in the whole state of Nevada, right? So we're kind of blessed up here in the Midwest, the upper Midwest. Because we have meat processing, but it still isn't enough, right? And so that's why we're interested, right? Is the various drivers of what's been going on. There are a lot of potential business models for meat processing. So, I think what people think of with meat processing is usually, boy, I'm going to actually have a processing facility that's doing harvests and cutting, right? I think that's where people go. But there are actually a lot of businesses that are variations of it, or go up chain, or up the value chain, or lower, that are possibilities. And so I think for those of you who might be more in the planning stages, you may want to open your thinking up to more options when you think about meat processing. So, one situation is you buy an old deer processing facility, that does not a very large number of animals. It's an old site. But it might actually be a really good way to get into the business, because you get up and running pretty fast, and there might be a book of business, meaning there's some customers there that would follow the facility. So you're not starting from square one. There's a lot to be said for entering businesses that way. Then there's the pure, like, start from scratch. We're doing the whole enchilada. We're going to be USDA certified, and we're going to do some value added processing in there, right? Like, there's that. Maybe there's you're going to be a state only certified facility. Maybe all you do is mobile. Maybe you just do processing, but you don't do harvesting. Maybe you do harvesting, you don't do processing. Maybe it's just a butcher shop, right? And maybe all you do is cured meats. Like there are market opportunities at all these points along the value chain. And the important thing for you guys to know is that this takes some research and some thought. Like it shouldn't just be, wow, we need to do the whole enchilada everywhere. That's not the right answer. Like, and I think usually when people do the research, they start discovering where the gaps are. And that's usually where you want to play, is where the gaps are. So that there's just a wide range of things. So what I want to do now, and this will help you learn who's in your group, but also would help us, is to have you share what kind of business model you're pursuing, or what do you have right now, and what are your biggest barriers right now to either getting in your business or growing your business or selling your business or whatever it is you're trying to do. What do you do and what are your barriers? And you can either raise your hand and share, just by talking, or you can put something into the chat. You haven't decided and you are exploring your options. Well, that's really, really good. And the reason I say that is that just the last slide, right? There are actually a lot of options here. And some of the work, all of the work that we're going to be doing today together should really help you with that decision and that exploration, right? Because it's going to outline some very specific things that you're going to want to do in order to figure out your opportunity, right? So you are absolutely 100% in the right place. This is going to be a great 4 hours for you.
And then Josh had mentioned in the chat, they're just currently still at this point in time, and we are working with them. I think this was a great opportunity for them to learn more as well. Greg, I see your hand is raised. If you want to go ahead and speak, feel free to.
Yeah, we currently have 2 mobile poultry processing units.
Cool.
And we are building a halal goat and lamb packing facility.
Wow.
And our current biggest issue probably right now is the marketing on the halal goat and lamb packing facility. I think we have the financing done. We're just putting it together and building.
In the whole thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you're absolutely 100% in the right place at the right time for all of that today, because we're going to address all of that today. And I applaud you for doing a halal goat and lamb processing facility. Where are you located?
We are in Elk River, but our facility will be located in Wilmer, Minnesota. In
Wilmer, Minnesota. Okay, so you're in Minnesota. Yeah, that is terrific. I mean, one of actually, I was working with a client here in Wisconsin, kind of northern Wisconsin toward the Twin Cities. And this was a farm that raises beef, and they were thinking about putting mobile processing. But it not move it, if that makes sense, like buy a container with processing it and park it on their farm. And I said, why don't you, I want you to do some market research. So I want to call, and everybody's like, well, I hate my processor and blah, blah. Like, no, actually call around and find out what kind of capacity there is. And they did that, and they realized that actually the opportunity was more around goat and lamb, small ruminants, as opposed to beef, right? So cool. That's awesome.
Thanks for sharing, Greg. And Josh and Cindy also included to the responses of currently packaging goods only. They want to continue to expand to an equal to or state inspection to further processing of value added products.
Awesome. And Jeff said you own 2 locker plants in Minnesota, offer custom processing beef, hog, and wild game, also sell retail. And you're looking to sell both plants. The barriers to selling seems to be find a suitable buyer. All right. That is awesome. So remember what I just said, everybody on this, that often a way to get in a business is actually to buy an existing business. In a lot of ways, it eases your entry in to do that. And finding, now on the flip side, if you are somebody like Jeff, who wants to sell their business, how do you find somebody? And also, how are they going to finance it, right? Like, financing for a buyer can be a big project. So I will make sure as I go through today to address the specific case of what do you do when you're trying to sell? Because there's some things about that are pretty unique. I think in small processing, and this is true in dairy, for cheese plants, it's true for meat, it's true for a lot of small food processing businesses that I work with who want to sell. What they end up often doing is selling to somebody who's pretty close in their network already. And by that, I mean, it may be an employee or a couple of key employees. It may be all the employees. It may be somebody upstream or downstream in the value chain that ends up buying them, right? And the reason is that our businesses are not wildly profitable businesses usually. And they're usually taking on some debt, right, to buy the business from you. And then where's the cash flow going to come from to do that, right? It starts being like, you know, these investor grade people are not just out buying meat plants. They don't buy cheese plants either, right? So it ends up being close in, and it ends up taking some work to sell. But I'm really glad you're here with us. And then Jerome says there's a client purchasing a processing facility in Montana. They want to expand production. Wow, they're ambitious about things, include some retail sales. Cool. So it's got some vertical integration in there. That's great. Cool.
Appreciate everyone's responses.
Yes, thank you. We have quite a range here, which is fantastic. And I will keep that in mind as I go through it with the examples I give. All right, so what are people looking for? Remember that list of what we're going to cover today? It's actually the same, close to this list, right? Like, and I use the word investors. When I use that word, I'm actually probably should change it to stakeholders, because I'm thinking about this is what banks are looking for. This is what investors are looking for when they're considering a meat processing facility or any kind of food. Yeah, so they're looking for something that you're doing that's differentiated. They're looking at your brand. They look at the category you're in, and I'll show you what I mean by that. They want to know that the manufacturing is working. It's all realistic. They want to know that you have a growth strategy, that like you have one, and that it makes sense for the business. And then they care a lot about the team, actually. And by team, I mean, it means leadership, definitely, but they also care about employees, because right now everybody understands how difficult labor is. So let me talk about, I kind of talk about paths. Now, this is business model paths. Like, so why do we care about this? Well, it's because different financial stakeholders are interested in different kinds of businesses. So in the world of food, and this applies to meat, there are businesses that stay small, right? And in order to do that, they need to have a business model that can generate sufficient cash flow to get the business to profitability, right? Like that is at basic. In the case of meat processing facilities, a lot of times they're located in pretty rural places, right? And that tends to mean that there aren't a lot of people there and there aren't a lot of customers. So relying just on this really small local market to make your meat market work or meat business work is probably not that great a solution. So then you're like, okay, Well, there are a ton of people in the Twin Cities. Well, yeah, that's great, but are you really going to put a meat processing facility in the Twin Cities, right? Harvesting in the Twin Cities would be a complete nightmare. So like, where do you go? Like, we got to figure this out. And how do you do that? So, all right, well, maybe you do something called diversifying income. So this sounds pretty business school wonky, but there are two ways to kind of paths for that. One is vertical and one is horizontal. So vertical integration is what I'm seeing and what some of you are proposing, right? That would be, you have a processing facility and you also have a retail counter. So you bring animals in, you process them, you cut them, you sell to consumers in a retail store. And maybe you have wholesale sales too, right? That's vertically integrated now. Another way that businesses can do this is horizontal, which is kind of the same thing, but on its side. So this is, you have one business that's the processing facility. You have another business that is going to be the retail outlet, right? And I have examples for both. And both work. Most of the time, vertical is the better strategy. And those of you who are suggesting those models, I think it's a really good way to go. The third little dimension in here is going where the market is. And this addresses this issue that we probably don't have enough people in our local market to be able, even if we did vertically integrate and said we're going to sell to consumers, we just can't, there aren't enough people here, right? So we have to have a method in our business model for getting to where the consumers are. All right, so we're going to build profitable business models here. And these are the pillars of this. I tell people, if you are running a business or want to run a food business, this is the piece of paper to print out and stick on your refrigerator, because this is what you're going to be doing all the time, these pillars. And just when you get it all humming, they all have to kind of be humming simultaneously, right? And just when you get it humming, the market changes or something happens, and then you got to go back and redo it again. So the great leaders of businesses, I've learned this over and over again in my career. I was at one point, I was in a CEO roundtable called Vistage, which is an international program for CEOs. And I had my cohort group, and I had a couple people in that group who, one had started his business, one had taken over an electrical contracting business from his dad when it was 2 trucks. And when he was in my group, it had north of $1 billion with a B in annual sales. Right. Like, and the other guy I'm thinking of also was like up there in the hundreds of millions of dollars of sales. And, you know, when you talk to them, when I interacted them, what did they do? Like, what do people who run those giant companies do every day? Right. Like, they actually are working on this list all the time. This is what they do. So we get to work on this list together. So the first thing about this is differentiation. And I use the word, what makes you defensibly unique? What is it about what you're doing that's unique? What I love about the halal goat and sheep processing plant thing is there aren't a lot of other people doing that, right? And so it's not just another plant, it's one that's doing something special. In the world of anything consumer related, any kind of CPG company, whether it's meat or cheese or any kind of beverage or, you know, paper products, it doesn't matter. If you're selling things, consumables to consumers, you want to be the red apple, you don't want to be the green apple. So how do you make yourself different? And then what is it about what you're doing that makes it hard to copy too? Because, right, like the more defensible your business is, the better. When I did my whey business, the reason I got into that was I had been running a decent sized cheese company. We made 20 million pounds of cheese a year. So it's not a small cheese plant. we took our whey and made animal feed out of it. And we started making organic cheese. I couldn't add value to the whey. There was literally no organic whey plant anywhere in the country. And none for goat either. And so after we sold that company to the original family that founded it, which is a whole nother story. I was too young to retire. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be the crazy person who does this whey thing. Well, it was a big pile of money, right? I told you I had to raise 12 million just for the plant. Never mind the brand and all that stuff. So the total raise was more like 14 million. So I raised all that money, but guess what? Once we had that, we had no competition, right? The whole point was that no plant like this existed. And oh, by the way, you needed to raise 14 million to copy me. And oh, by the way, the only way you're going to finance that is if you have relationships with enough cheese plants making organic cheese to supply you, which nobody would be able to do. So to this day, that business, there's one small plant in California that does organic whey, and that's it. To this day. So that when you create something unique like that, that's hard to copy. That's why we sold to a public company very quickly. We were a valuable thing because people recognize that. So think about your uniqueness. And then how do you get uniqueness about your business? So it can come in food in a different way, in different ways. So in meat products, so goat and lamb and halal certification, that's unique, right? And that has to do with certifications. Also, like personal relationships, right? Like you got to know the right people to have enough halal customers, right? And to know the people who come and do the supervision. Same thing is true for kosher. It could involve ingredients, like you specialize in certain kind of animal farms that do grass fed or something like that. It could involve, like when you're selling your own meat, you have your own meat brand. Is there something about the flavor of the meat because it comes from your region? There probably actually is. Is that something that consumers recognize and value? Something for you to figure out. But all of these things can make you different. Customer experience in the world that we're talking about, a lot of farmer frustration anyway that I hear, and sometimes I take that with a grain of salt, right? Because farmers like to complain sometimes about things, but is around customer experience, like people who have no confidence that the place they take their animal is actually giving them their meat back. Like they literally don't trust them to that level. And they've why? Because they've had bad customer service experiences in the past. So that's a real deal. This customer experience is a real deal in this marketplace. This is an exercise. So you're going to also get a file that is a PDF file when this is over that has a bunch of worksheets in it. This is one of them. There's several. And the reason you do this exercise is it's an incredibly powerful exercise. I do this every time I write a business plan for somebody. I work with them on this. Every time I evaluate something for due diligence for investors, I look at this. And the reason you do that is it really helps you hone in on a couple of very key things about your business. So how do you use this? You put your name of your business or the business you think you're going to create, right? And then you look at your competitors, and those might be meat processors within a certain radius of you. And for example, in meat processing, I don't think people travel that far away to get their meat processed. Maybe curing meat they would, but otherwise, like I think they won't take it that far. So you're going to be looking in a radius, right? And then, so you're going to list your competitors, and then the top is attributes that are important to your business. So it could be availability of cattle right? If you're thinking about beef, or the availability of goats and sheep or whatever, right? So availability is one. What does your pricing look like compared to your competitors? Price is always a variable in food, and meat processing is no different. So how do your prices compare to your competition? How does your service apply to the competition? How does your basket of services compare to your competition, right? So you're going to be honest with yourselves when you do this, and you'll fill in this table. And what happens when you fill in this table is reality check, right? Like we're like, wow, I thought we were going to be doing this. And it turns out lots of other people are doing it. And how are we going to be different? Remember what I said about that. It is absolutely critical in food. If you're not different, here's what happens. Then it becomes all about price, right? And we are small, no matter what any of you decide to do. Even if you think you're like, whoa, don't we have a big business? We used to have a tiny one, now it's big. Except that that's compared to like JBS or something, who can produce a pound of hamburger for $1.99 or whatever it is. Like, you are never going to win on price. None of you are going to win on price. So you have to figure this out. So you do this exercise and you'll realize, wow, I don't know, like I am doing the same thing, or wow, I see there's an opportunity there. Nobody's doing goat and sheep, or nobody's doing hard, Italian style, hard cured salamis, or you know what I'm saying? Like, this exercise is really good. I did this with the CEO of a company I worked for. It was my one foray out of food. And we were like $100 million company. It was not a small company. And I headed up strategy and marketing for them worldwide. And the CEO was very convinced, like he knew exactly how we needed to go to market and talk to people. And we did this exercise. And what he discovered was the way we were talking about our company and the way we were thinking about our differentiation was all about service. But this was entertainment lighting. So we made dimmers, control systems, and fixtures. So for theater and architectural installation. So every light in a Disney theme park was controlled by our products. And he would always talk about service, right? Like, we have the best service, which is probably true. But if you think about what we did, like, everybody has to have service, because it's like the show must go on. They can't not have lights, and Disney can't have no lights in the, you know what I mean? So it turned out that everybody was saying that, which means that it's not differentiating you anymore. You have to go somewhere else. So this is a powerful exercise for you. Those of you who are trying to figure out, like, yeah, we're going in, but we're trying to figure out what business model we're in. This is an unbelievably good exercise for doing that, because you're going to find the white space, and that's what you're going to do. All right, another huge issue for all of us is scale. So even if we identify the white space, then the next question is, is there enough market for us? And how big do we need to be? How many do we need to aspire to be? So we got to deal with scale. So I did this exercise here for grass-fed beef as an example, because it's a niche product, right? It's not the big commodity market, and none of us are really in we're going to be doing a niche of some persuasion. So I did this. This is all USDA data and census data, so it's not proprietary stuff. And I did it for Milwaukee. So the question is, how big is the market for grass-fed beef in Milwaukee? And if that market is that big, how much processing capacity do we need? Should I build a plant, right? So you start crunching the numbers. There are 1.5 million people in Milwaukee. Unfortunately, Milwaukee has not been growing much for the past decade. So it's kind of hovered around the same number for quite a long time. So you can't bet on its growth to help you. So 1.5 million. The USDA says that our per capita consumption on average of beef in the United States is 54.6 pounds, which means that the market in Milwaukee for beef, period, not specifically grass-fed, is 85 million pounds, which is a lot, right? So you look at that number and go, whoa, we need a lot. This is cool, right? But now we're going to get, the rubber's going to start hitting the road, because we're selling grass-fed now. We're looking at grass-fed. Not everybody's going to pay the premium, which can be significant for grass-fed. Not everybody cares about it, knows about it, has a clue about it, right? So according to the USDA, 3% of the population reports that they buy some grass-fed beef. And we don't even know if that means 100% of what they buy is grass-fed or 2%, we don't know. But they estimate 3% of US consumption is grass-fed. All right, so 3% of 85 million is now only 2.5 million pounds, right? So that's a bit different of a number. So, all right, and then you think, all right, 3%, that's 47,000 people in Milwaukee it's not the 1.5 million people, it's 47,000 people. And then you think, all right, if the on average beef get a yield would be 580 pounds per animal, that's 4,440 animals. That's not a lot for a state like Wisconsin. We have a lot of cattle in our state, and you guys in Minnesota, you're Nebraska, the Dakotas, the folks that are on our in this session, right? We come from the land of cattle. So that's not a big number. And Milwaukee is kind of, it's the biggest city in Wisconsin by a factor of 2 anyway. So it's still only 4,440 animals. So, all right, now let's think about slaughter facilities. So those of you who are in Minnesota probably know about Lorenz Meats. Mike Lorenz is super generous with his time and does a lot of work with the, I think it's called the Artisan Meat Co-op. I can't remember what you call them. It's an organization that helps artisan meat producers. Anyway, he's really involved in that. He's a very generous, amazing person. They do amazing work. What I learned from them, we used them back in actually when I was in the company before I did Tara's Way, we made calf starter feed, and we had research barns, and we needed to do trials on different nutrition regimes, and we needed a small plant that could it was super important for research purposes, because every animal we sent them had a different feed regime. So we really needed to make sure that everything was labeled correctly, right? And we got the right animal back labeled right. So we went to Lorenz, because they're like the best, right? And what I learned from them then and other people since is that you got to be thinking about around 15 beef equivalents if you're going to be doing the kind of wholesale business that Lorenz does. You can be smaller if you're selling direct to consumer, but they don't really emphasize that. They're more wholesale. So 15 animals is kind of a cutoff. So I put 15 in here. 15 animals a day is a capacity number. And that works out to 296 days of slaughter, which is one facility. So we think that we need all these facilities when in fact, it may be hard to keep them full, right? So the reason that we don't have a lot of facilities in a lot of cases is this market size thing. So does that mean we don't do it? No, it just means that, boy, grass-fed isn't going to do it, right? That's not going to, it only supports one plant. So you're going to have to do other species. You got to do something other than grass-fed. And then then the math starts to work. And if all you want to do is grass-fed, then maybe you got to sell to more than just Milwaukee. So this exercise of like really quantifying your market is really important, right? And again, rubber starts hitting the road, right? Like, I think I want to do X, but when I actually work through this, wow, I'm not so sure there are enough people here. So now I need to do something else to my business model to get the scale I need to get the business to work. So this second thing, this and differentiation are like super, super important exercises to go through. And I did in that PDF that you're going to get, this is that exercise, just like fill in the blanks, right? And these numbers in bold, what that means is you take the result from 1 and multiply by the result in 2. 3, take the result in 3 and divide it by 4, right? So it just walks you through what I just did on the last slide. So you can use this to kind of take a peek at what you are thinking about doing or what you're currently doing, and get some feedback basically about what's going on in your business model. So with that in mind, I want to another session here where we share a little bit on either chat or raise your hand. And the two things we just talked about, how do you think you're doing in terms of differentiation? And how do you think you're doing in terms of scale, right? Do you have enough scale in what you're thinking about or what you're currently doing to get to break even? And if you don't, like, what are some thoughts about fixing it? And we'll process that a little bit.
Our competition that we currently have has some English barriers. It's not really the ability to communicate with the USDA.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is they're not certified halal, so they can't put that on their packaging.
Mm-hmm.
And their plants are really small, so they don't
Mm-hmm.
have a competitive advantage on the size of animal that we
Mm-hmm.
are going to process. We're going to actually make our plant so it just processes that size animal instead of
Mm-hmm.
the where you have a beef processing facility.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to do a goat on a beef line.
Right. Right.
We figure that at full capacity, we'll only meet 10% of the market. And our competition really is the Australian market.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have to beat them at a 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go by the 4,000 cattle unit mark a year.
Okay.
So we have that.
Cool. So do you think that you can, what do you think your price is going to be compared to the Kiwis?
We are gonna probably end up $1.50 higher a pound, but we will be fresh. They won't.
Right. Is all coming in frozen.
Yeah.
And they're all, what else do you think you can do to overcome that price? Because I think you can, by the way. So
I think if we go to Wisconsin and start working with the dairy goat population over there, the retired nannies, because there's a preference for that type of meat and that type of animal. I mean, sells pretty cheap on the market.
Yep.
It's a little more difficult to process, but it does sell well.
I mean, the other thing, so I'm going to talk to you about branding coming up here and stuff, but because you brought this up, when I launched my Tara's Whey product, I was the first organic whey to the market, and because it was organic, right, it was going to be more expensive. And then I took out a lot of the chemicals and fillers and stuff. And so we were expensive. We were literally preserving 100% more. And by really good target marketing, we ended up in a situation where the plant was sold out for a year when we sold the company. And that happened in 3 years. And it's because we just marketed to the right people. So you don't need everybody, you need the right people, and you need the people who are willing to pay a premium price. And you have to set yourself up through how you market yourself to command that premium. But I'm not, that doesn't scare me at all. It isn't all about price, is what I'm telling you. Right. And if you differentiate yourself enough, then it becomes less and less about price. Is it relevant? Of course it is. People don't entirely ignore price, but it's not the deciding factor all the time. Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have something they want to share?
Well, I just know from working with a few of the folks on this call, I know Josh and Cindy have a good example of differentiation of just their product. If you guys want to share in the chat a little bit more, but you know, they're pasture raised pigs. And then even Christy going more into the exotic non-amenable species of bison, considering that as well, differentiating from the competition. But,
and remember, when you're a processor, your differentiation could be around the animals and the products. It could also be around the services you provide, right? Do you smoke or do you not smoke? Can you make sausage, right? It's more than just the species. You want to think about differentiation in terms of the whole business. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to keep moving here. But good examples. Thank you for sharing. So what makes that category attractive when we're talking about attractive for you? And we also mean your financial stakeholders. So in the world of, this is true for any food business, when people look at this, they're thinking about, okay, it's kind of like what you were saying about the goat and sheep, right? The fact that you're going to only be 10% of the market. Sometimes people get like, oh, we're only going to be 10% of the market. That's bad. Actually, that's really good, because it means you don't, there's 90% of the market you don't have to capture, and you're still going to make your business model work, right? We actually kind of like these smaller categories. We like businesses that are in categories that are big enough that your business only needs to be small. Does that make sense? So as you're thinking about your plans, think about that, and you're trying to figure out what your products are going to be and scale. Yeah. So the other thing people care about a lot is just what's going on in the macro environment, right? Like what, you know, you're putting your business plan together. I'm sure a lot of you know that you had to go out and do some market research, and some of it was about your competition, but some of it was just like general stuff, right? So what's going on? This is just some example. I'm doing beef now for a couple of reasons. One is I'm going to keep going down this grass-fed beef trajectory because it's an example of something that shows you how to work with a niche, if that makes sense. And I'm also going to be using it to show you the kind of data that are available. So that's why I'm doing beef, and because I know you all don't just do beef, but anyway. So what's going on with the beef market? Beef consumption is projected to keep growing through to 2025. And this particular graph is looking at kosher, halal, and others, and they're continuing to grow too. So contrary to popular belief, potentially, plant-based meat is not replacing meat. In fact, it's sort of hitting a wall. So if you read and look at stock prices, the like Beyond Meat, that when it went public went crazy and everybody was climbing on board, their prices really sunk since then. There's a brand called Miyoko's, which is a dairy replacement, a vegetable dairy replacement brand that is a public company, and it too is having trouble. Because I think they got to a certain point, right? There's a certain number of people who are vegan or are looking at plant-based substitutes because they don't like animal agriculture for whatever reason, right? but they didn't get beyond that group, if that makes sense, right? Like there's this small target market, but those valuations were based on this idea that they would keep getting bigger and bigger, and then they turned out they didn't. People are still eating meat, and it's still a core feature of the American diet. And 90% of people will say that they eat meat. Only 9% of Americans say they don't eat meat at all. A bunch of people would say they are omnivores, so they eat meat, they eat dairy, but they also eat plants, right? Flexitarian, pescatarian, right? There are all these other diets, but it's still pretty dominant in our culture that people are eating meat. Maybe a more diversity in meat, but we're definitely still eating meat. All right, protein priorities. So this is, by the way, this isn't what I'm showing you is attitudinal data. So consumer attitudes. The big food companies, like in the big meat companies are in this category. They do nothing without looking at market research, like zero. They will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on market research before they do anything. And then we, as small entrepreneurs, we kind of don't use data. We kind of wing it, and we do it based on what we think is going to work and what we think, consumers want. And we may not be 100, off base, right? Because we are probably closer to our market than a lot of those big food companies are. Having said that, it is really good to use data because data can also help you stop from making, decisions that you're making based on your own presuppositions and you don't even realize it, right? So attitudes from consumers about what you're doing are relevant, and they're really insightful often. So, all right, what do people in animal-based protein priorities, which of the following are most important to you when you choose animal-based proteins? They had to select and rank the 3 that are the most important. The highest one was all natural, so no additives and preservatives. All natural is sort of a weird claim, right? Like, how do you really substantiate that? It's weird. So more discerning people will be like me saying, oh yeah, that means nothing. But it turns out on average, when you look at average consumer, it's pretty significant. The second one is easy to prepare, which is really interesting, right? Like this is animal-based proteins, easy to prepare. How does that play out for us? Well, those of us who are in the meat business know that somehow we have to get rid of a whole animal, right? It's not just the steaks. People know how to cook steaks. They're easy to prepare. What do you do with roasts, right? Are we all getting together for the family thing? Probably not anymore. So roasts, hard to get rid of. People don't know how to cook them. People don't know how to do flank steak. People don't make soup anymore. So we don't know what to do with the bones, right? There are layers to this problem, right? So easy to prepare is something for all of you to think about in terms of your differentiation too. So is there a way that you can make a product that is all you got to do is the consumer has to do is open a bag, right? And is there a way you could make a product like that in your plant? Is it a smoke thing? I don't know, but you follow me. It's very significant that that's the number 2 thing. Lean ground beef. So there's still, people are still kind of fat phobic, right? So lean cuts, free from claims, we're now down to 25%, but that would be free of hormones, antibiotics, that kind of thing. Brand is about 20%, 21%. Local is 16%. So what I find interesting about that particular thing is that for people like me and for some of you, maybe all of you on this call, on this webinar, we're kind of local food system motivated people, right? So we kind of assume everybody is like us, and we're kind of in a bubble, right? Like we live in a bubble. Everybody cares about this. Actually, only 16% people care about it, right? And in the case of grass-fed, it's 16%, which if you looked at this data 5 years ago, grass-fed wouldn't have even been on the list. So things are changing, right? But be careful of the fact that we're in a bubble, right? And their data does a great job of highlighting for us ourselves whether we're in a bubble or not. How much higher awareness of health benefits of grass-fed meat? So remember, I told you I was using grass-fed as an example of how you could use data like this. So, all right, so healthy protein, factors people consider with healthy, and no preservatives and additives is the first. Kind of, yeah. It's interesting, right? Because that claim will cross other categories, right? You have that in beef, you have that in meats, you have that in dairy, you have that in grains. It's impossible. All natural again. Antibiotic free for meat is pretty high, and grass-fed in this case is coming up pretty high. And what I would say about that too is even 5 years ago, it definitely would not have been 41% who knew enough about the whole thing to equate grass-fed and finished with a health claim. And whether people even know that it has to be finished in order for it to be healthier, finished on grass, I don't know that they know that, but it's interesting.
Yep, and Tara wanted to point out a comment from Josh.
Oh,
and
sure.
Cindy
Thank you.
They have seen a decline in fresh meat sales and an increase in a lot of the ready-to-eat items.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. And by the way, Laura's going to do this when you do that, because I get on a roll and I'm not looking at the chat. I will tell you, I work with a meat processor who has a retail store. They're not a harvester though. They take in primals and they break them down in in a fresh meat store. And they're in an urban area, like a near suburb, I will call it, of Milwaukee. And I was talking to their owner not too long ago, and he said the same thing that you said, Josh, that people are buying less fresh meat, and they do things like kits that involve meat and vegetables to make pot roast, or like already ready to go things. And he said that is just taken off like crazy, and they love it because they're putting inexpensive vegetables together with their meat when they do that. So ready to eat items is a thing now, and I'm really glad you shared that, because that prompted me to share that other example. And yeah, so thinking more about that, like what does that look like for you if you're going to have a retail component to what you're doing? Yeah, so this is an example with grass-fed, and this story plays out in different ways for lots of food, and definitely meat. So as I said, we're kind of a region where we produce a lot of livestock, right? Like all of us do. We're also a region that doesn't have all that many people. So the entire state of Wisconsin's population is 5 million people. There are over 5 million people in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the Twin Cities metro area. You have more people than the entire population of Wisconsin. We have counties in our state. I actually looked this up once because I was working with a producer cooperative up in Bayfield, Wisconsin, which is kind of the north. It's like the Nordic Circle, right? It's the north. It's on Lake Superior. And they literally had a higher population of deer in that county than they had people. There were like, at that point, there were like 3,000 people in the whole county. So guess what? We're not the target market. Like if you were looking to sell your grass-fed meat and you're willing to sell it anywhere, where would you sell it? It actually wouldn't be here. This is often true with what we're doing. And then here we are, we're local food motivated people and we want to sell everything here, except that we're not our own target market, right? So the mountain region, which is around Colorado, is a very strong market for grass-fed meat. It's a very strong market for meat, period. And then the West Coast is big, right? Pacific and the West Coast. If you want to do grass-fed beef, you go west, young man. So prices, what's going on with prices? Prices have been increasing, right? You've been seeing these price increases. You've had to increase prices because you are processing and labor costs are going up and packaging costs are going up and supply chain problems, transportation costs have gone way up. Like everything has been going up. And so food inflation has been non-trivial. This is an example of data that you can get, which is another Mintel product. It's called, what is it called? GMP, good new product launches, something like that. They literally have people who go into stores and document every time a new product launches, and they put it in a database that you can buy access to. So you can search that database for things like grass-fed ribeye steak, and you'll get every single product anywhere in the country. And you get a picture, you get, you can view the product in the database. You can turn it around so you can like look at all the sides, read the back label. Then they have a database of claims. So we have regeneratively raised. So if you went in and down here, claims, microwavable, ethical, animal hormone, social media, ethical, sustainable, right? All that. So if you put those search words in there, this is what comes up. So you get, and then it shows pricing and it shows the pack size. It's really kind of terrifying, right? Like that there is data out there that is tracking everything to this degree is kind of insane. But look at that. This is 8 ounce, so half a pound exact weight product. It's a ribeye steak from Thousand Hills, lifetime grazed, which I guess means it's grass finished. And it's $17.99 a pound, right? So what is that? Basically 18, so $36 a pound. And it might even be higher than that now, I don't know. That's a lot. And one of the things that I'm seeing happen with my meat people, particularly the people who ship, do things online, is that who sell online, is that we're starting to kind of hit a wall here on price. The same thing is true with restaurants. So restaurants are kind of hitting a wall. Because price of everything is going up and they're trying to keep people in restaurants. So the beef people that I work with, the farms and other people, and the people who do exotics too, you know, their meat is expensive, right? And they're seeing, for the first time ever, they're having trouble selling steaks. Like usually the fillet and the ribeyes go, and then you have trouble trying to sell the rest of it. And now the opposite is happening because restaurants and chefs are saying, you know what, if I'm going to keep people here, I need to cook with cheaper cuts of meat. So pricing is definitely kind of getting up there and hitting a wall because of the economy and because of how people are behaving in this economy. Oops. And you're starting to see this kind of you starting to show up in the data. So this is Bloomberg data, and you see how it kind of peaked. This would have been, or I would say it was probably the holidays around December of last year. And since then there's been, and maybe there's a little uptick here, but there's been some downward pressure, right? And I think that's going to keep continuing as the economy, if the economy softens, it's going to put downward pressure on things. What does that do with your profitability? Well, you guys who are living it know this, right? Like you make money on a whole carcass. It's not just one thing. And you do things like bones that you might even have to pay to get rid of, right? So what happens when you start having trouble selling those premium cuts for these really premium prices? It puts pressure on your whole business, right? Because now you're like, uh-oh, how am I going to make that up somewhere else? Because you have to make money on the whole animal. So really having a handle on how you make money on a whole animal is the difference between making money and not in the meat business. Hands down, I can't tell you how many times I have seen companies in the meat business who really don't have a handle on this. And as a result, they lose money, right? Your margins are so thin in the meat business that if you don't understand and you don't have good carcass utilization and you don't understand how you're going to make money on a whole animal, problems happen. So where are prices headed? I mean, who knows? If I were, a soothsayer, I'd be doing something else for a living. But I think people are saying that that we're going to have we're having inventory problems, right? And why is that? Well, the drought in the West is certainly a driver of that. I've been in the dairy industry in Wisconsin for many years. And we've been saying for many years, like, this part of the country is where we should have cattle, right? Like, yes, we have winter, and yes, we have problems with mastitis and things because of humidity that they don't have in the West. We know that, but we also have grass and we also have water, and there's so this like specter was always out there, and the last few years it's kind of coming home to roost, right? And so cattle inventory is going way down. That usually means that prices are going to go up. The amount of cattle in Wisconsin has gone up. It's one of the few states in the country where we have more beef cattle now than we did 10 years ago. And I suspect Minnesota is in that boat too. All right, so supply is going to be constrained, then price goes up, but the consumer doesn't just eat beef, right? They eat other forms of meat too. So if you look at pork and chicken, those are the biggies, right? And look at how much chicken consumption. It's interesting, go back to 1990. Beef was not that far behind chicken, right? And look what's happened. Fast forward, we're still eating kind of the same amount of beef, maybe a little bit more, but look at how much chicken we eat. It's really different, right? So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about what you guys do, because it isn't just one kind of meat. The other really gigantic thing that's going on is the money side of things right now. In order to get a handle on inflation, we have a Federal Reserve that's raising interest rates. All of the central banks have been doing this all over the world. They're doing this intentionally to slow the economy down, right? That's why they do it. And that works because it makes money more expensive. And then businesses can't do as much expansion or whatever, and they start slowing down, right? And that causes people to get unemployed. That's the dynamic we've been in. What I see happening now is that businesses that were kind of having financial problems, like maybe they were a startup that didn't have enough, they were undercapitalized, and or their young business whose sales did not increase as much as they thought it would, or so I'm talking about young food businesses, meat processing and others. When money starts getting more expensive, their business models, it's even a bigger nail biter to get them to be financially viable, right? Because their cost of money just went up. For all of you who are thinking about building out a meat processing facility, it will cost more to do this now, substantially more than it would have 5 years ago. And that part of that is just the cost of money. For those of you who are trying to sell your business, this also affects that, because most of the buyers are going to borrow money to buy your business. And so your those buyers are looking at are looking at needing to pay a higher cost of capital too. So what does that do? You know, like when mortgage rates go up, it puts downward pressure on the price of homes, right? When we had loose money, then the price of homes up, you know, all appreciated quite a lot. And now that's all come slowing to a halt, if not seeing some outright decline. So money being more expensive is definitely a dynamic that we got to keep in our minds right now. All right, quick things in the chat. How are you going to mitigate this kind of stuff that's going on in the external environment, right? Those of you writing business plans, you're going to be talking about the external environment and the market research and all of that. What does that all say to you about your business? I'll say, to get kind of cranking on this one, I'll share that I was working on a business plan. I'm still working on it. We're still negotiating our way through it. The founder is absolutely massively attached to what they thought they wanted to do. And all of the market research, everything is showing that it's a bad idea. And what I'm recommending is that they just wait for a year, like wait until some of this shakes out, some of this uncertainty shakes out, and see where the cost of capital is. Because you go in an environment like this, it's cumbersome and time consuming to renegotiate debt. Like even if you take it out at a higher interest rate and then you could renegotiate it, it's still not an obvious thing. It's not a shoo-in that you're going to be able to renegotiate it. And so then you're kind of left with a permanent hole because you're paying more for money. So postponing things is one scenario. What else are you all thinking about?
Greg, I think your hand just went up. If you want to speak, feel free to.
I think we're looking at timing of how long it takes to create a business plan versus build something out. And we're looking at, you know, our assets on our business sheet minus depreciation have been increasing because of the interest rate rising and the inflation. So we're able to capitalize on those issues when we're looking at financing. Our customer base does not take loans with interest.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that's right.
I mean, we're really looking at our customer base is why the decision we're still going forward, where a lot of my friends in the industry had projects going and they just stopped.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff on the shelf.
Yep. Yeah. Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, your project is interesting too, because your customer doesn't have a lot of options. And so they're going to be thrilled to see that you have, right, that you are bringing this solution to them.
Right.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing about business models, because when you have a really defensively unique business model that fills a real need in a consumer's mind, and it doesn't have to be everybody, it can be a small niche, which yours is, right? It makes them more resilient when the economy is in a situation like it is right now, right? Because people can't switch. Where are they going to go? So
I think we're going to come out I think whatever's going on is just going to be ending, or will end within a quarter of us being producing.
Yeah, and that could be. I mean, when I did my Tara's Way thing, we closed. The joke was that we were the last business to close before the economy fell apart in 2008 and 2009. We were building when the economy was falling apart. And then we launched before it picked up. We launched in early 2009. Because of that, we had our project, like we had 14 miles of stainless steel pipes in that building. We were like, it was crazy, right? The amount of technology and everything in there. We built it in 9 months. Like, holy crap. I had a wonderful contractor, but it was also because we built in a recession when there was plenty of labor looking for work, right? So it's an interesting thing about timing. You want to think about timing, and you can't, it's like timing the market. You can't always time the market, but when you're doing projects like this, timing is important. So thank you
Right.
for sharing that.
Amazon just quit buying joists for roofs on concrete buildings. So those are available finally.
Right. For
Stuff like that.
example, right? Like
Yeah.
interesting, right? And it's because the economy is slowing down. So for those of you who are in the position and you think you've got a business that is insulated from some of this for whatever reason, it could be a very good time in the near future to do some building. I totally agree. All right, we're going to do a little bit more and then we're going to take a break. So I want to talk about this. I started talking about it kind of a little bit. I alluded to some of this and what I was just talking about. So this is called target marketing. Target marketing is an incredibly important thing for food brands to do, because if you try to appeal to everybody in meat, what you're doing is pitting yourself against the giant brands, right? And all you got is price to compete on, and you will always lose. So we are not doing that. We have to do target marketing, right? So not an option. So we're off in the target marketing land. And what do I mean by that? So the idea with this is we're going to take the whole market and chop it up into pieces. It's called market segmentation. So we're going to food market research firms and people do this. They take the universe of consumers and they clump them together into groups of people who make decisions based on similar criteria. And maybe they have, so we care about them behaviorally, right? What they do that makes them behave similarly. And then we look at things like demographics and gender and where are they located and all those things, right? So we have them chopped up, and then we say, we are going to pick and choose the best fit for our business. And more important than that is we're going to ignore the rest of them. Okay, so this is the key to why I could be so successful with Tara's Whey, because I did not sell at the time that I launched my product. That was 100% more than the competition. The major market was bodybuilders. And I went to a bodybuilder show, and bodybuilders, literally they're guys in these shows that have like no shirt on and the six packs, and they kind of pose, and they're women who do the similar thing, except they have shirts on, and I'm walking around there feeling like, holy crap, I do not belong here. And then I was talking to people about my product, and I'm all excited, right? Because we're building our plant, and I'm going to be bringing the first organic whey protein to the market, and it's going to be hormone free. And I had a guy look at me and say, why would I care about no hormones? I take hormones. And I'm like, whoa. And then all I care about is price, because I use whey protein 3 times a day. I'm like, oh, all right. So I was enough of a marketer to know that all that feedback did not mean that I didn't have a business. It meant that was not my target market, right? That was the dominant market at the time. So I had to say, you know what, I'm not going to address the dominant market, which was a really good choice, because guess what? There are a million products out there for them already. Like, why am I even worried about that? What turned out to be the opportunity was a health and wellness consumer, because whey has all these benefits. So for a healthy lifestyle. So I completely ignored that market from that day forward. And I did everything in my product. So I knew my target customer cared about the planet. They cared about what the packaging was going to look like. I knew they shopped at Whole Foods. Like, you know what I mean? So when you get clear about who your target market is, and you align everything you do for them, and you ignore the rest of it, you end up being way more successful, right? So really understanding that. So you target what these market segments that are the best for what you're doing, and then what your product is, what its price is, how you promote it, where you sell it, all of those things line up. This is true for you guys who are going to have a store, like that store that I alluded to that's in this near suburb to Milwaukee. There are a lot of young professional couples live in that neighborhood. They have no time to cook. They're not cooking roasts on Sunday. No way. They needed something which is like, wow, I want to go in there and get a really cool meal that I can pop together and I look like a hero because we have this great home cooked meal. And it took me 2 minutes because they made the kit for me, basically. Right. So it's all about understanding who your community, who your target consumer is. Really cool. Really powerful when you get this right in a food company. I want to share this with you because this is quantitative market segmentation. So how do you get those pieces and chop them up? Well, I said that market research firms do this. This is free. Free is the right price, right? It's called Claritas, and it was developed by Nielsen, the people who do polling data. They also do all kinds of food data. But they developed this thing and then they sold it to a company called Claritas, and it's buried deep on their website. And it's kind of a test run, so you can see a level of the data, but you can't go deep with it without paying. But even at this level, there's stuff you can learn. So here, you're going to put a zip code in here, up here. It's geocoding data. So you put in a zip code and it tells you the top 5 market segments who live in that zip code. Like, so and then there's data around each one of these. So for those of you who are going to open a meat processing facility and you're thinking about having a store, you want to do this to figure out who these people are who are going to be around you. For those of you, like, there may be another strategy where you're going to locate, because you are going to harvest, you're going to locate the harvesting somewhere where it's easy to site and trucks can get in and out and all that good stuff. But then you're going to have a store and it's going to be closer to an urban area because that's where people are, right? So that's when you start using this zip code data to figure out, well, where am I going to go in the Twin Cities? If I could go anywhere, where am I going to go? Well, you're going to use this data to do that. So you put in a zip code, you get who's there, and then you click on one of those groups and it gives you a bunch of information about those groups. So here's their name. They always have snarky names. This is called Upward Bound. And they own a Mitsubishi, they eat at Qdoba, they shop at Express, they go to yoga and Pilates, they use Spotify. Like, okay, so all kinds of attitudinal behavioral things about them. And then there's also mapping. So if this is a group that really resonates with what you're doing, you could probably, for example, about halal, be able to use this to help find communities, right? This can go down, you can zoom into the zip code level. So you can go way smaller, right, on a city, get every zip code in the Twin Cities. Or you can zoom out like this. And white means there's none of those people there. Red means there's a lot. So we want to go red, red, red as you're looking at this. So use Upward Bound. This is Dane County. So that's Madison and Wisconsin. There's some sort of moving in that direction around the Twin Cities. You get the picture. If you really want to find a lot of them, you're going to the California coast or around Seattle, and then you look at the East Coast, right? Another thing I will point out, if any of you are thinking about doing anything on Amazon, I could do like 4 hours on selling on Amazon, so I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you one thing. If you have any thoughts of selling meat online, there are a lot of people who do that. The reason one would do anything on Amazon is customer discovery. And that is because when we shop, we tend to get more than one thing, right? We want steaks and we want olive oil and we want spice and rubs and we want whatever all else, right? And the plates to put it on. It's more like going to a grocery store to go to Amazon. And so before COVID, not so much. After COVID, a lot of food is sold on Amazon. So one of the biggest maybe advantages of doing this is you get this data just on your sales, right? And they give you, you can sign up for these various tools. Some of them are free, some you have to pay for, that do visualization of your data. But, you know, big circle means you had a lot of sales there. Little circle, not so much. No circle, didn't sell anything. So you get that, you can sort it by time, you can look over time, how it's growing. You can use this to figure out if your promotions are actually working. It will tell you time of day when people order, time of day when they look, but they don't order. Like, it's an unbelievable treasure trove of data. And since you're selling there anyway, it's kind of like you don't have to buy it because you're already there in a way. So it's people, I don't think people realize how valuable that is. And again, you can zoom way in with this. So you could be looking at zip codes down in the Minneapolis Twin Cities area or something like that. All right, I'm going to talk about brand strategy. We've been going for quite a bit here, so we're going to take a break after this. But food brands, so what's a brand? People talk a lot about brands, but I don't think people really know what they are. My definition of a brand is a really good brand is an incredibly efficient way to create an emotional connection with a consumer. It's a weird sentence, right? Like an emotional attachment. Why do we want that? Well, the reason you want that is if people are attached to your brand, then they're going to be really loyal. So in our world that we're operating in, we have farms, I know many of these, who raise animals and they sell halves and quarters. They've been doing this for years. And the same people come back year in and year out. There's an incredible amount of brand loyalty in that world. If you provide a good customer experience, so, and by that I mean eating experience, it's easy to order. And oh, by the way, a lot of these go way back. There's no automation to them. People call, like, it can be very primitive, right? But the point of the thing here is that in the world of meat, when people find meat that they think is really great, they will keep coming back. And so this is true for you guys as processors too. It's not just farms, right? If they get a good eating experience, they're going to come back. It's also really, the flip side is really true too, that you do grass-fed and you sell an animal that is one of those grass-fed and finished animals that you need a chainsaw to cut the steak, they'll never come back. You can lose people over this too, right? So anyway, what does a brand do? That relationship becomes people need an efficient way to think about it, right? And what it ends up being is the brand. And so, you know, remember, I'm old enough to remember when Coca-Cola tried to change a recipe and everyone went ballistic, right? Like, no, Coca-Cola has that flavor. Don't make it sweeter. I know what Coke is. We are not changing it. And oh, by the way, the font hasn't changed. The color red hasn't changed. Like, everything around that is consumers are attached to. And that's what you want. I had the people who bought Terrace Way. I saw them at a trade show and they said, you know, when you created Terrace Way, you didn't just create a brand, you created a cult. Those people are so loyal to this brand. That's what you want with your business. And if you build that in food, you will win. And so what is that about, right? It's about the process of really knowing what your brand stands for, your company. What do you stand for? What is the value proposition of your company? What is the essence of that? Like, what is the one word that really captures that? And then positioning is how you talk about that to your consumers. And you want to talk really consistently about that. And don't change critical stuff, right? Consistency for years. I mean, think about Coca-Cola, how long that's gone on for how in a consistent way. So what I tell people about this is there's a lot of touchy-feely stuff in here, man. And it's hard to do this on your own, right? Like we think we know, but it's like, it's hard to do. So I believe that most of you, all of you probably need to have a website. It's hard to even exist in this world without a website. If you're going to invest in having somebody do a website for you, or fix your current one because it's not working or whatever, that's a good time to revisit this, because that website becomes this communication vehicle, like how you're talking about your brand, how it looks. All of those things get communicated through your website. So, you know, if you're in that stage, I really encourage you to think about getting some help with this, so you can help you think this through. This, by the way, is a worksheet though in that PDF folder that you're getting. So if you want to go through this and fill in the blanks, it will help you start thinking about it. And even if you're going to hire somebody, they'll really appreciate it if you've done some of this work already. Awesome. So we've talked about differentiation. We talked about scale. We talked about target marketing. And now we're going to talk about sales, and then we're going to switch and we're going to start talking about plant related stuff, which has a whole bunch of things with it too. But I want to talk about sales, and basically it's having a strategy for sales, right? And so what do I mean by that? Like, all right, so am I going to build a meat processing facility that cuts meat in exact weight packages, so it can and I'm going to be FSMA certified so that my wholesale customers can sell it to grocery stores, right? Like that's a chain of events, right? If you want to sell to a grocery store these days, probably needs to be exact weight, probably needs to be FSMA, you know, that's one channel. Another channel of distribution is you have a retail counter. And in a lot of cases, these smaller meat processing facilities are, even though they're in rural places, they seem to have people, if they're, again, you have a good brand and a good service that people want to come back over and over again, good eating experience, they'll drive to you. It's interesting, right? So that's a different channel of distribution, right? If you're selling direct to consumer, then you're getting the full margin on it, which helps your bottom line, right? So it's smaller volumes of sales, but higher margin. And oh, by the way, it doesn't need to be exact weight now, right? Because you're doing portion cutting and you're doing it right there. And white butcher paper is fine. We don't need vacuum sealed packaging or thermal packaging. We don't need any of that. So really thinking through your sales channel helps you understand the capabilities you need. And I think what happens to people is they kind of do it in reverse. Like we're start, you know, because it's tangible, right? Designing a plan is tangible. I want to have it this big and I can see it in my head, and we need to do blah, this, that, and the other thing. And then you're not really thinking about how you're going to sell and what needs to be in there in order to sell successfully to that particular channel of distribution. So I really want you guys to think about this. And this is true whether you're doing a processing plant that does harvest, and are you selling wholesale? All of that, definitely want to think this through. Also, if you're in the value added business, you want to think this through, right? Like, so what you do is cured meats. Okay, that's cool. Are you going to sell it wholesale? Are you going to have a store? Are you going to sell it into restaurants, which is actually a different channel of distribution than grocery stores? Different distributors supply the different channels, right? So really thinking this through and have a strategy is super, super important. And then you want to think about who's going to take care of this in your business, right? Are you the kind of person who likes sales? Or are you the kind of person who hates sales, right? You hate talking to anybody. I really kind of like the back of house, running the processing line is really what I want to do. I'm all about ops, right? That's cool, but what happens, what I see happen in small food businesses and meat processors who are owned by people who like to do the back end stuff is that the front end, all this sales stuff really suffers because of that, right? Because they don't like doing it. They don't spend any time on it. So be realistic. The same is true on the opposite, that we have people who start businesses because they're very sales oriented. That means that you need somebody strong in operations in the company, because you can't do both well, right? So really thinking that through, I think, is important. The thing I see that happening most of the time is people don't think through their sales channels, and they kind of are like deer in headlights. They get the plan is up and running. They're like, holy crap, how am I going to stay busy, right? It's a whole nother channel. Think of it as a channel of distribution. If you're going to be the kind of person who builds a plant and your sales are going to only occupy like 50% of the plant, and what you're going to do for the other 50 is make on behalf of other brands. That strategy with so that's a manufacturing business that has a private label component to it. That is a very, very common strategy certainly in the cheese industry in Wisconsin. Most manufacturers of food do some private label. It's very unusual. You have to be a pretty big company before you have enough business that you can build a plant and all your own business is going to fill it, right? So how do you sell to those people, right? So that's different. Like, how am I going to find other farmers to come and ship their animals to us? And this is the kind of farmers who are direct marketing. How are we going to find those people? How are we going to find people who need wholesale, right? Or are you going to have a retail counter where you wouldn't need exact weight, but you discover in your market research that the potential people to do that private label all need FSMA certification and exact weight? Well, then you might have to build that capacity into your business. So this sales thing, super important. I think farmers are terrible about this. I think us manufacturing people are kind of terrible about it too, because we kind of like are talking about it and thinking about hard, tangible stuff. The pros in food companies, they start here. They start with the consumer and work backwards to the plant. They don't do the plant and work forwards, right? And this channel strategy is how you're going to connect the consumer to what you're doing in your plant, right? That's the whole thing. Sales is what's connecting all of that. So that is something I want you all to really be thinking about and have a strategy about. So there is another worksheet in your packet that is about channels, and this could change over time. Like, you could be thinking, all right, I'm going to get my act together in year one. We're going to get the plant up and running. We're going to have our retail store up and running. And I'm going to do animals for, deer hunters and game people, right? That's all I'm going to do, because I won't have the systems in place and everything else that I need to do out there. And then then maybe in year two, I'm going to invest in the right packaging equipment, so that later in year two, I can start doing wholesale business for retail consumers. right? So it can happen over time. It doesn't have to all happen at once. So what I want you to do is customize this, like whatever these channels should be, you're going to put them up here. What are you doing in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4? Fill in the table. And then those things have implications, right? Like, do I need more staff if I do that? Am I selling online? Does that mean I have to get my website together, right? This is asking you some questions about that to help you really kind of think through your plan. All right, true confession time. Do you really understand about sales and marketing? And have you gotten help in the past? What help do you need in the future? Have you had in the past? Has it been helpful? True confessions. So while you're waiting, I get to show, did this work? I don't know if this works. Can you see this? This is my original packaging for Tara's Way. If you go to the store now, if you go in the Twin Cities, if you went to Whole Foods, you would see Simply, it says Tara's up here. It's still white, but they have this god-awful scoop with powder in it. And I'm telling you that because after you sell your company, you have no control over what they do. Oh yeah, it's sad, but Greg is holding out until somebody types something. Greg, thank you for sharing the way you have been sharing. I think people, it's hard, you know, you go to these webinars and it's kind of convenient and not to just sit here and listen, which is good. But I think people learn so much more when we know what else is going on, right? I'm currently in FFI. It's been fantastic. I didn't know enough, especially on sales and marketing. Cool. So you're already doing a program with FFI. That is great. Because part of the reason, so remember I started all that, and I was really insistent that we have a lot of sales and marketing in there because I see a lot of people fail with this. Like when I say true confession time, I think in the world of meat in particular, I think it's really hard for people to get their heads around this because we're motivated by different things, right? And it's kind of squishy. It's not straightforward. Oh, cool. And you listen to my episodes on Edible Alpha. Awesome. So at the end, I'll point out a couple of episodes. So I used to host Edible Alpha, the podcast, and I did that for a number of years. Like I was like way at I tend to do this. I tend to be like at the beginning of things, right? So ahead of the curve, so to speak. So we have a lot of episodes up there, but there are a couple that are directly pertain to meat that I would strongly suggest that people listen to, but I'm super glad that you've been listening. That's awesome.
I intended to include that in your intro, but you have just such a plethora of background. Did not share that component of Edible Alpha.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that something? I mean, again, it's a function of the fact that I'm older, right? Like I've been doing relevant work for my whole career. So it means that there's a lot in there. That's all relevant. Greg said that he's hiring a cultural advisor to better understand your customers. That is really wise, right? Like you're going to be dealing with populations that are different than you, right? And what I can share about that is not so in dairy, it's the cheese company I ran and my own whey plant, we were kosher certified, and we were making to a very high standard of kosher certification, and that meant that the rabbis would be on site when we started up production, and they actually were from Chicago, but they would live during the week up near the plants. And then they go home. It's interesting, right? So it was like a window into a whole nother world, right? And it was very interesting because in their culture, these tended to be pretty conservative Orthodox Jews. And so this is men who wear, you know, with the long sideburns and the big tall hats and stuff. And I give them a lot of credit because for them, it's really hard because I'm a woman running a company in their culture, that would not happen, right? I gave them a lot of credit because they did a nice job of trying to figure out a way to do that. But it meant that I had to be very sensitive about things, right? Like down to, you know, in their culture, women wear wigs, they cover their hair. They dress very conservatively. They don't actually wear pants ever. And it's not that I kind of conformed to that, but I did go out of my way to not make them feel totally uncomfortable, if that makes sense, right? Like and my experience with that tells me that if you show some degree of sensitivity to their culture, even if it's not like, and they don't expect you to suddenly be them, right? But when you show some sensitivity, they really appreciate it. They recognize that you're doing it and they really appreciate it. So I think that's wonderful that you're hiring a cultural advisor, because I think the halal community is going to be even more different than, you know, the Orthodox Jewish community was. And it'll be really eye-opening, I suspect. All right. And Josh said, not as good as we should. We feel like we're missing out on effective online marketing. Yeah. So, so I think, that is really common, and it is hard to figure out how to use, online marketing without help. And I say that, for a bunch of reasons, but, I put together a climate smart commodity grant first for a client who got it, by the way. There's one of those giant grants. And in that, there's a digital marketing component to it. And I was talking to people who are digital marketing firms about how they work, because we're going to contract with somebody, right? And the crazy part of this is that the people who do search engine optimization of a website are not the same people that design websites. The people who work on social media are not the same people as the web people. The people who work on Amazon are not the same people as either any of those other things. The people who work on email are on your transactional portfolio. So do you use WooCommerce, or I would strongly recommend for Meet people to use GraceCart, because it's simple and it works for Meet, and accommodates cuts and all that stuff that Meet people have to care about. Like, they're all different people. So in this grant now, there are 5 different subcontractors to do the digital marketing component of this. And I'm like, oh my God. There are firms out there who do digital marketing, and they bring all of that in-house, and so you don't have to deal with 5 different subcontracts, but they tend to be really expensive. So one of the things I will tell you all is that I work with a lot of people now over the years at FFI, and also private clients, and who digitally market food, and a lot of meat actually right now for some reason. And the thing that works the best, like orders of magnitude the best, is your own email. So everybody gets like, oh, we're going to go off and do all this stuff. Actually, what you want to do is have a robust email list of your own, and communicate effectively and consistently with your audience all the time. And by all the time, I don't mean like deluge people with communications, because they don't like that either, right? If you are sending out something meaningful once every other week to people, that's not so frequent that they won't pay attention. I tell everybody about this, that you get to look at a website. It's not Meat, I get it. It's called Breadtopia. It is a company that is located in a small town in Iowa called Fairfield. It is orders of magnitude the biggest digital marketer of food that I've ever worked with. to just put it into some perspective, they buy and sell a unique range of artisanal and organic grains. They mill and they sell companion products for that. That's what they do. And they have a 40,000 square foot warehouse that is full, right? That manufacturers in there too. They're mill in there and store in there. But just to give you some orders of magnitude, it is a big brand now. And what I learned from them about digital marketing, they're masters at it. Twice a week, send an email to your list, use Amazon to drive people to your website, have a couple of things you available. So because customer discovery on Amazon is great, do some promotion and communication on other social media platforms, but don't spend a shit ton of money on things like Google Ads and stuff. So that's what I tell everybody. That means SEO is really important. That means you want to make sure your website, it's really easy to order. Your website loads quickly, right? All your brand is effectively communicated on that website, right? That means that your website is really important. So yeah, it's a recipe if you want to call it that.
And we have one more comment from Jerome, just saying that they're hiring a marketing firm, and interesting based on the previous resources in terms of the website that I had provided before, as well as the Amazon component.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Just kind of an added comment to this question too, and just a lot of the discussion as well today is, a lot of the small and regional processors and operators, they're wearing multiple hats within their operation, whether they're owner, their HR, their accounting, they're fabricating the carcasses, and then, marketing sales sometimes may not be, previously in their portfolio and a master of that. So sometimes, as you were sharing, can utilize other resources to assist in that capacity.
Yeah. And if you want to reach out, like somebody brought up that they're in the FFI program, like there are things that are out there that are designed to help you with this stuff. And I also know vendors, and I'm constantly working on projects where I'm like, yeah, I need to find somebody who could work on this project. So I'm actively right now actually working on something very close to this that I'm interviewing various people who might be good for digital marketing for food. So feel free to stay in touch, right? I mean, it's tough, right, to find the right thing, and it can be very expensive. And I've seen people waste a lot of money on firms too, right? Just because they exist and they charge a lot doesn't mean they know food. Like that would be my thing. You want to find out if they've ever worked with a food company before, and if they've specifically ever worked with meat before. I strongly suggest that.
Yep, and at the end, everyone, we will be providing Tara's contact information, as well as my contact information to get connected with everyone. And we do have your email addresses again for all the information that was shared today. So feel free to reach out to both of us.
Awesome. So I'm going to leave the world of sales and marketing now and move into process and buildings and stuff, which tend to be easier for people. They're hard though in meat, as you probably know. So anytime you have a process business, so you're a food manufacturer, you're a meat processor of any persuasion, right? When I was doing my whey company, I had an amazing contractor, because remember I mentioned to you earlier that I was in that CEO group. One of my group members owned a construction company. And so he built my plant. And, when you're in a CEO group like that, like you're not going to screw up, like you got your buddies, right? So anyway, they did an amazing job. But he said really early on in the process, he said, Tara, a building in a manufacturing facility, a building is really a shell around a process. So I need you to tell me what your process is and what its requirements are. and then we'll design a building for it. I'm like, oh, okay. Cause I was like, you know, drawing pictures of buildings. So in my case, I needed help because you know, I had run a cheese company before. We did some whey processing, but I remember I was talking about building a plant that was never been built before. And it was a building that was going to be able to keep organic whey separate from goat whey, separate from RBGH free whey. So that was the idea. And that's batch processing, right? And whey plants are usually continuous process. So they run 24/7. You never shut them down. You never switch between anything. And so literally that plant never didn't exist. So I found somebody who was the world renowned. He had a PhD in whey, right? It's like, wow, you can get a PhD doing whey. He was from Ireland, and at the time he lived in San Francisco. So believe it or not, in one day I got on an airplane and flew to San Francisco, took the train from the airport right downtown. I met him for lunch and we talked about what I wanted to do. And he took a napkin and he drew my process on a napkin. And then I took the napkin and I took the train back out to the airport and I flew home. Like, it's kind of crazy, right? In one day. I don't have the napkin anymore. I wish I had. Like I tell people, I wish I had a copy of that framed in my office, right? But you never really understand the significance of things like that. There are these moments that happen in your life and you're like, wow, that was like really significant. Oh, well, it was a napkin. Anyway, that was a process flow, right? Like, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to keep things separate, and this is how many tanks you would need and all that kind of stuff. Barry was his name, and Barry ended up being really involved in my company for the whole time. So he was a really trusted advisor to me in designing the plant and going through all of the construction. He helped me get lined up with big international accounts because we were exporting really early. So he's really instrumental in that B2B sales component to what we did. We had our brand, but actually a much larger component of our business was supplying infant formula companies with protein that went into infant formula. So none of that would have happened without Barry, right? And it's all about the process. So what you want to do is think about this, the process of your business. So where is this stuff going to come from that's going to come into the plant? What are you going to do in the plant? What are going to be the byproducts that happen because you do what you do in your plant? And then what's going to go out the other end, right? What kind of packaging equipment do you need? All of that. How many people are going to work there? How big does that, right? Because you've got to design a locker room, right? There's all this stuff. So it all starts with this input-output idea. And a big issue for you guys is, if you haven't discovered it already, is wastewater in any kind of food manufacturing, and definitely in meat. You're going to have washable surfaces, right, to meet food safety stuff requirements. And that means there's water around all the time, right? It means there's cleaning things that are going in the water all the time, and they have to go down a floor drain. And the BOD load of that is really pretty high with meat processing, right? Which means that your local wastewater treatment plant may or may not be able to handle it. So a really important part of this whole process design is designing what you're going to do. Like, how are you going to bring an animal in? How big the pens need to be? How big the holding room needs to be? How big the cut floor needs to be? All of that, right? But it's also, what are you going to do with the byproducts? So in the case of my plant for Tara's Whey, we're doing whey. So I took in raw whey that's 95% water. And what went out the other end of my plant was a powder, a dry powder, right? in 20 kilo bags. That was what we were doing. And there are different kinds of whey, which means that we had a lot of wastewater because we're taking all that 95% of water out of the product. And then we're doing all that washing that I talked about, right? All of that. And there's a lot of protein, there's a lot of fat in the byproduct and all that soap and all that stuff. So I ended up needing to have a wastewater pretreatment plant. So not only did I make whey, but I had a little wastewater plant of my own. Aren't I lucky? So you have to have a plan for this, right? And it can be very cumbersome, like locating this in a rural area, right? You got to think about this, because if you have to do this with a septic system, holy crap, the drain field may have to be really big and you may never get permitted. So having this really well documented helps. It kind of triggers a bunch of things, right? The design of the building, but also all that permitting stuff, right? And am I going to locate there? So much of this is related to that. Another big thing I can tell you about with outbound product that's important is can you even dispose of things like offal and hides, right? And I think Ari, you're doing some programming around that too. Do you want to share that with folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So with AURI, we again are a technical assistant provider for the industry, again, specifically in this upper Midwest region. And we've been learning a lot about those various bottlenecks that are impacting the industry. And kind of a plug for, we are working with collaborating with a variety of other groups to really emphasize on the byproducts and hide utilization that Tara has spoken about. And come this summer, early fall, we'll be putting together and have a plan to really address this issue. As well, we're working with a group that is really looking at various applications for that byproduct and hide utilization and various strategies. So there's definitely an initiative and efforts focused on this, because really historically and very specifically to hides, for cattle, let's be specific on that, is previously a number of years ago, processors were selling their hides, and when renderers came to pick up the hides, they were getting paid a premium. However, with the addition of more like synthetic hides and other factors in the industry, it's now vice versa, where processors are now having to pay to get those hides removed from their facility, because there's some limited outlets for those hides. And at the end of the day, a lot of those are just ending up in landfill. So seeing alternative applications and strategies and technologies that we can use for the industry, and a good discussion point that we'll be having come this, like I said, summer/fall.
So I got to tell you a story, because it's very funny and maybe it has some significance. So I at one point had a amazing farm that we were doing feed trials with this farm and they're a dairy farm and a dairy grazing farm specifically. And I had brought some animal welfare people who do animal welfare certification to this farm, right? And we're going into, they did something very unique with their calves. They were group housing their calves, which is really unusual. And so we're taking the animal welfare people there, and there's this like big heap of, it kind of looked like dirt, right? It was a compost thing behind the barn, right? And so we're walking in there and they asked like, what is that? And they said, well, that's where we compost like things like animal hides. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the animal welfare people, right? But and she said, you would be amazed at how fast it breaks down in a compost heap if you have an active compost heap. So it was just funny, right? Because it was the animal welfare people, and it turned out they were great. Like they understood farming and it wasn't an issue. But I bring that up because I think even solutions like composting would be very helpful, like thinking out of the box a little bit about how we're going to do this might be really good. And compost, people make money if they can produce good compost these days. So anyway, I
No,
thought I would share that.
that's a great example, Tara, because yeah, in this other short course that we're discussing about the byproduct and hydrolyzation, we're definitely getting a panel and great examples of processors that are utilizing composting for a strategy
Wonderful.
for them. So
That's so wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I in your packet, there is this sheet, which is funny because it's kind of a blank page, but I want you to draw a picture of your process. This is your version of my napkin, right? I want you to do like just a box or whatever you want it to be, doesn't matter, with arrows, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, right? And this is the byproduct and this is the byproduct. And then you can take that picture and start quantifying it if you want to, right? And oh, by the way, I haven't talked about this. There are people in this world called process engineers who this is what they do. And how do you get a process engineer? So when I was doing my way plan, I went and found Barry, right? He was sort of a process engineer, but we had to take like his concept then, and then I did have process engineering come in. And some of that came from the equipment manufacturers themselves. So if you have specific equipment that is going to be used in your plant for specific things, sometimes as part of their sales process, they know that plants have to have this stuff worked out. So they actually have process engineering people on staff. So that kind of advice you can get for free. I did end up having to pay people though. I paid people to do some of the process engineering. I paid people definitely to do the wastewater engineering because I had to have that stupid wastewater pre-treatment plant, right? Like wastewater treatment engineering is a whole unique thing in and of itself, right? So we had to have some of that in our project as well. So you draw your picture, but then you are going to get engineering help to design this. And this is another area I think that AURI has some resources, right, for helping people do process engineering.
Yep, correct. Again, we're not the process engineers. However,
Totally.
we can assist and
Yeah.
through our network connections, certainly refer to various process engineers, again, that are really focused in this meat and poultry processing space. Again, there's engineers for housing and things, various capacities there, but we specifically those that are specific to meat and poultry processing engineering. So we certainly can share that information.
So what's interesting, Greg just posted, what was your continuous improvement strategy? So I think this sort of relates to a couple of things. So one thing is, when we designed our plant, all we did was take raw whey and dry it. Isolate the protein, take out the lactose, take out other stuff, right? So it's isolated protein, then dry it and put it in 20 kilo bags. And we ship those to a blender who had the packaging equipment to make these, right? And also single serve pouches. Because the packaging equipment to make these, and even more so those single serve pouches, was a lot of money. It was almost another $1 million. So what I did was design the plant to be big enough that we could do that in-house, right? I did that because when I did the cheese plant, we worked with this incredible brand called Belgioso, and then the Enrico, who owns that business, he was up to like 8 plants by the time I left there. And he said, you never build things big enough. I learned that the hard way over and over again. I always overbuild, and I put my offices in space that could become processing, because you can put an office anywhere. Processing has to be close to everything else. So we had an office that could become a processing space. When we got up and running, we had proof of concept. We were clearly, the brand was clearly growing and getting traction. That was when we knew we were gonna, in order to improve our process and get more profitable, we were going to have to bring that in-house. So at that point, we bought the equipment, we put it in-house, we got rid of our offices, right? Like, just kind of that whole plan actually happened. So that's one level of improvement, continuous improvement, if you want to think about it that way. Another big part of continuous improvement in a manufacturing environment, though, is more management related, right? Like, you're gonna have some kind of dashboard of key indicators of efficiency, right? And you're going to use that to go back in and identify areas where you're underperforming. And the idea of continuous improvement is the idea that you're going to look at places where you can simplify or streamline processes and improve things in order to get more efficient, right? And that's I would call that a management component to it. The first example, I would say, is more of a overall business of evolution, right? That was more continuous improvement, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Now, we all live in this. We know this. There is an enormous regulatory gauntlet that you get to run down when you're in the meat processing business. So those of you who are in the business, live with this every day, you know about all this. Those of you who are contemplating coming into this business, you want to familiarize yourself with these things as soon as possible, because they're going to be a major part of your work life for the rest of the whole time you own this business, right? We have to care about this. So, do you need to be? Is it enough to be state inspected, or do you need federal USDA inspection, right? That's like one cut, number one. Another one is, do you need FSMA? Like, are you going to be selling to customers that require that level of certification? Is it enough to have a HACCP plans? You definitely need SOPs. Like, you can't run a manufacturing thing without that anymore. You can't really do it without HACCP either. And it's funny, I say that, but I'm old enough. When I first started working in the cheese industry was the time when HACCP was becoming the thing. Like, before that, we didn't even have that, right? So there was a big effort, a big push, I would say, in the late 80s, early 90s, just to get plants to implement HACCP. Which now becomes like, how could you operate without that? So anyway, there's going to be a lot of this. AURI provides training about it. It's related, though, right? I mentioned this before. Think about this in terms of where you want to take your business, in terms of who your customers are going to be, right? Start from the customer and work back. That's how you're going to figure out what you need to do. And because you don't want to do stuff for the sake of doing it, it's more paperwork. All of it is. And it's time consuming and expensive, because it's time, right? Time is expensive. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Yeah. The only other thing I will say, I tell this to everybody all the time about food safety. And that is that, we do this for a reason. So I have very good friends who are dairy farmers who make cheese on their farm, and it is a state-of-the-art plant. They are incredibly careful. like their dairy farm is on one side of the road, the cheese plant is on the other. I mean, manure is in, if you have manure on your boots, right? And you come into a cheese plant, major disaster, right? Because it's bringing in all kinds of contaminants. So they were like, put it across the road. We're going to be incredibly careful. And they sold some cheese that had Listeria, and a fetus died because of it. Their lives will never be the same, right? And that can happen in meat too. And I'm just telling you that these are good people who do the right thing. It's been devastating. And so you got to take this stuff seriously. And when you're like, holy crap, this sucks, why am I doing this? This is why we do it. You don't want to end up there, right? So there's a good reason why we do it. Is it cumbersome? Absolutely. Do you want to do more than you have to? Absolutely not, right? So you want to make sure that you have really thought this through. I guess the other thing I'll bring up here about it, and this is different parts of the country are different like this, but I know that I've worked with meat people who have wanted to go, like, or wanted maybe a stretch, but they've realized that their business, they really actually do need to get to USDA certification. They haven't been in the past. And so they've made that decision. Well, now what, right? Like, is there even an inspector available? In a lot of parts of the country, it's not obvious that you just call the USDA and they go, oh yeah, we got a person. Like, right? Like they have to be there every time you're there. They need an office there. Like, holy crap. And so if you are making that decision, it's something that you want to realize is going to take some time to implement. Just because of staffing. So,
Yeah, and Tara,
yeah,
Jeff provided in the chat to our previous slide of hide and byproduct utilization, and just he wanted to share a comment on how quick that market has changed in a few years. Went from getting paid for the hides and offal
Jesus, that happened to you in 1 month. Wow.
Yep, to get and got a check like usually once a month and an invoice for the next, and it was 60,000 annual swing to cover their financial statement, and they had to raise prices just to cover the change overnight, and the whole industry had to roll with that punch. Appreciate that comment, Jeff.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of that has to do with import and export stuff. It's really hard. So I think anything, I mean, for a meat processor, that $60,000 that went away in a month, right? That's probably the difference between making money or not making money, right? And it's not a trivial number. And yeah, so we really do need to dig into this and try to figure out new ways to deal with this and try to add value for people. It's really important. So I'm glad that AURI is working on it. And kudos to you, by the way, Jeff. I know this may seem weird, but the fact that you raise prices, like a lot of people like aren't on top of the financial life of their business enough to realize. I mean, they're like, holy crap, that was a swing of 60 grand. I get that part. But then like, no, we have to take it to the next step and raise our prices. A lot of people resist that because it's hard. But then they end up going out of business. So kudos to you for having done that, even though it was tough, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who are doing value added now, I think that we talk about USDA a lot because they're the regulatory arm for the processing. But if you're going to start doing these value added products, then they might evoke another level of regulatory oversight, right? And that comes from the FDA. So things that like and this is stuff to keep in mind, right? If you were gonna do breads that have meat in them, or like pepperoni and put it in a bread, or or pepperoni and you're making a pizza, right? Like all of a sudden, when you do that kind of value added that involves meat, it's oversight now comes from another place. And I think people kind of don't like put all that together. Okay, so we figured out, all right, we need our QA thing. We need that our act together about that. We thought through our process. We understand how it aligns with what channels of distribution we're going in and customer requirements. We got all that. And now we wanted to talk about a building way back in the beginning, but now we're finally ready to talk about it. What the right facility is going to be the shell that surrounds your process, right? So this now is when you hopefully will get to work with a fabulous contractor like I did, who can help you design the building. Part of the reason you do that process thing is you need to get to a specification for the building. And what I mean by that is, what do you need this building to be able to do for you, right? So how much space do you need for various functions? What does the process flow need to be? So we line up the rooms so that they follow the process flow. One of the real problems with buying an older facility is often they were designed for functions that are different than they are now. So like that 100-year-old cheese company I ran was like a rabbit warren, that facility, right? Because it was tiny and they kept adding little rooms, and that's common. But when you're doing it new, you get to like say, no, this is the way I want it. This is the process flow I want, and this is what the spec is. Usually engineering help is necessary in order to do this. My contractor was kind of the quarterback in that in a way, because they were a design build firm, which means they're involved with you in the design. So we had the engineering people, and we would, I didn't even know there were that many different kinds of engineers, but we'd have these meetings with a lot of people in them just to sort through this. And you go, wow, that's a lot of meetings. But the reason that it took 9 months to build the plant, and by the way, that's a picture of my plan. The reason it took 9 months, only 9 months to build that, was that we planned like that for 18 months. We really knew what we were doing. By the time we broke ground, we knew everything. It was well thought through. So something to think about. Yeah, and who you work with is really important when it comes to this. But what goes in a specification for a building? So for meat processing, right? So, all right, drop-off site. Do you have people coming in with big trailers of animals, or is everybody coming in with a small gooseneck trailer? That's important because those people need to be able to turn around. So if you go back here, I don't know if you can see it in that picture, it may not be. So our intake was back over here. So you came into the site here and you wrapped around back here, and you would come around back here if you were driving a truck. And back here, there's a big blacktop area that was big enough for a straight tanker truck to come in, turn around, back up into an intake area, unload the way, and then drive out, right? And that's big. So you got to think about that when you're thinking about things. And part of the, issue of trying to make a facility that's close into town work, it is often about this. Like, you don't even think about this, but you need more space because of that, right? Than you think. It may be like that space is probably as big as our plant because we had to have that big turnaround area. Don't think about that. So thinking that through, right? Okay, who's coming in? What kind of access do they do? Then you need a place for holding animals. You need a place for doing your processing. You need a place to hang. So are you going to hang for 10 days? Or are you going to only hang for, 1 day? What do your customers want? Remember, it gets back to that. What do they want? What kind of refrigeration, what kinds of freezer, what are you doing with cut and wrap? Or is it all going to be manual, or are we going to do something to automate that? You know, when you look at your average, this is true for cheese too, and certainly for meat. If you're taking it all the way to portion cutting, you have a whole bunch of people in the cut and wrap area. You have way fewer people in the processing area. And when we're functioning in an environment where labor is so short, that says something about where we want to potentially put some automation, right? But if you're going to put equipment in there, do you have enough room for the equipment? Because it tends to be big, right? So you want to be thinking about that. You want to think about cooler and freezer capacity. Remember the wisdom of Enrico. Enrico was his name, from Belgio Cheese. Everybody always underestimates how big a building is going to be. That the Breadtopia people I mentioned, who are now have a 40,000 square foot building that is full. They came to a boot camp that I did in Fairfield, and they were doing everything in 1,500 square feet. This says a bit about how it was probably 7 years ago. Just think about that. And they came and he had this plan. He was all excited because they were going to build a building, and it was going to be, I think they wanted like 3,000 square feet. So, you know, that seemed like double the size. And I'm like, you're not doing that. It's not big enough. You have to go back. You can't do that, because the minute you move in there, that's like 1 year of growth, and then you're full, and you just built this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you got to build this bigger. So they went back and they started like investigating things, and it turned out there was this 40,000 square foot building, an old Fuller Brush warehouse, like an old brick building, crazy, right? That they got for a song because nobody'd been in there for how long, right? Is it the most efficient thing on the planet? No. Was it the right price? Absolutely. And look where they are now, like 7 years later, they're at 40,000 square feet. So think about that when you're doing this. Think about my story of my office now went away and became processing facilities. Like, and we were just one big bullpen. We put up cubicles, including me. And that was another Riccio thing. Loading docks on the outbound side. What does that look like? Pest control, lighting, ventilation, plumbing and sewer, water supply. What are you going to do with restrooms, dressing rooms? How high are your rails going to be? How big are they? You get the picture, right? The more specificity you have about all this stuff when you talk to a contractor, the better that discussion is going to go, because they're going to be able to say, okay, you've told me enough about what you need that I can just help you design this thing. When you don't have this information, by the way, contractors, well, good ones would say, hey, dudes, we need this. Not so good ones, or ones that are sort of like, oh yeah, this is what these people are like. They'll just do something based on what somebody else asked for, right? And they'll give you a number. It'll be a budget number. But this is where you start running into problems with construction ending up costing way more than you thought it would, because at the root cause of a lot of that is that this wasn't all really well documented. So there's another piece, another one of these blank pieces of paper in that PDF, which is just your spec. So start filling this out. What do we need this thing to be able to do? How much do we know about how big it would be? And eventually you'll get to the place where you know what the electrical load is going to be. Like my whey plant had a whole room that was all the electrical room, was a room. Like, who knew I needed a whole room? It was insane, right? Like, but that's where you're going to get to with this. All right, so now we have the process. We know what the building's like. We know how much space we need, because we're going to accommodate the building and the trucks and the outbound and the inbound and all that good stuff. now it's finally time to start figuring out where we're going to locate. Here's another thing we do wrong. We do this opposite too. We start talking to people about where we're going to locate before we know what we need. That's backwards. Because how could you know what you don't even know what you need? How can they help you, right? And so they'll show you like random stuff, and it may work and it may not work. You don't really know until you know, right? So when I did Tara's Way, I designed the system. The first thing I did was identify a plant that already existed. It was an old cheese plant. And that cheese plant hadn't been used for some number of years, but the location was good. So I had a map, and I drew a circle on the map, which was the radius that I needed to be in so that it was efficient to bring the whey protein in. Because remember, we're always 95% water. So it's very heavy to truck it. You don't want to truck it very far. So I drew this circle, and it was like 6 counties. And I knew what I needed. And so within that 6 counties, I started talking to people. I talked to the Department of Ag. They helped me identify this site. It was in the circle. And it was looking really good. And I was working with my contractor, who helped me figure out like how to talk to the economic development people in the town. And I had gone all the way to a public hearing. Like I was talking to people in the community who came and said, isn't that whey protein going to stink? Like, I don't want you around. So I had to talk about how much whey protein plants don't stink, because they don't. Right, like all that stuff. And then we were doing a phase 1 environmental, which is one of the steps along the way to get money. Usually have to get past these environmental assessments. And they found a buried tank on the property. And it wasn't just a tank. It was literally the old Swiss cheesemaker had buried a railroad car and had been storing diesel fuel in it. And of course it leaked. And then this was like up on a hill in a town, for those of you know, Dodgeville, right? It was in Dodgeville, and down that hill was this new subdivision. I'm like, oh my God, the water table, like it would all, so it was a brownfield, right? Like you can't develop that. And I can't, like, I have a brand new business, the risk of doing that, there's no way. So we had to say goodbye to Dodgeville. And then now what do I do? Well, I had my specification. So I took that specification and gave it to the economic development people in those 6 counties and said, can you please help me? I need to relocate because my site fell through. And I had 2 communities respond. And what was weird about that was, you would think I was not doing like animal processing, right? I was doing whey, which is not controversial for anybody. And it was easy. And you would think you would have a lot of response, but I didn't. I had 2. Part of the reason was the wastewater, because of that BOD load thing that I was talking about. I needed a location that could handle the wastewater, even with pre-treatment, right? And that narrowed the universe. And then the truth of the matter is, these rural communities, when it comes to economic development, do not have their act together, right? They're just not ready to respond to people. And so it's kind of like, they don't even have staff to do this, right? It's all volunteer people on their village boards and everything. It's just, they just don't have the capacity. And I think about, how are we going to get rural America to develop? Like, why is like the cities have been prospering and rural America has not? And then I have my experience going, there's some real barriers there, and it's not their fault. Like they're not big enough to hire people. So they don't have an economic development person who can help. And anyway, for all those reasons, I had 2 responses. I ended up going to Reedsburg, who actually did not have their own economic development person, but they contracted with an engineering firm who acted like on their behalf in that way. Everything else about that was really well organized in that town. So they did things like work through the whole process of, they had a TIF district in place before I came, so they could show me a plot, you know, in the TIF district. There was already power, water, sewer, high-speed internet to the site, right? So all that stuff was already there. They had a streamlined process for getting through permitting and approvals. They knew exactly that we could go through. It was really well organized. And I can't tell you how powerful that was for me, because that it took months and months out of the process. So I really like this idea of having a specification, putting it out to communities and seeing what comes back, rather than just trying to bluff your way through and talking to people. Because guess what? In the meat processing world, these are hard. They're hard to cite. We all know this. We all have examples of this, right? That not in my backyard. There's one of the interviews that I have in Edible Alpha was with Conscious Carnivore, with Bartlett Duran, who owns Conscious Carnivore now. He used to own Black Earth Meats, which was the processing plant in Black Earth. And he had the strategy of processing plant with a meat counter, but then he opened up a store in Madison called Conscious Carnivore, where there are a lot of people. It's literally across the street from Whole Foods. It's fantastic. Black Earth used to be a small rural town. Now it's kind of a bedroom community to Madison. And so when it was a small rural town, everybody understood about meat processing, and yes, we kill animals in order to eat meat. And so, yeah, but this plant was right downtown, right? And so things were changing. And so he got pushback. One of the things that triggered the pushback was actually the people who were picking up the rendering people. They picked it up, it was in a truck. They didn't do a really good job of closing the gate or whatever the heck it is in the back, and stuff fell out into the downtown street, right? Not what you want to do. But it wasn't even his business or his fault, right? Gets a cease and desist order, and then couldn't get financing, like, because there was this legal action in place, and it basically shut down the business. So location with these businesses is really hard, and you got to be really intentional about it. You got to get out ahead of it. Zoning is another big deal, right? Like zoning, and this is true for a whey protein plant. It's true for I have a good friend who's a flower farmer who wanted to have weddings on her farm. Turns out she was in a county that said no agritourism is allowed in our county. They gave her a cease and desist order. She was putting up tents 5 times a summer with weddings. It was craziness. Last night, this is so awesome, because she emailed me last night. It took them 3 years. They fought through and got changes to the zoning. So now the countywide, they're allowed to have agritourism events, and they have some limits on it, but not a lot. But it took 3 years, and they didn't know who they were messing with. But they messed with my friend. She was anyway, zoning is a big deal. So you want to figure out about that. You want to figure out about permits ahead of time. Like, what permits do you need for building, for wastewater, all that stuff, because that can bog you down hugely too. My contractor was super helpful with that, because they kind of knew the people, they knew the right questions to ask before I did, right? A good contractor will help you with that. Yeah. So there's a lot to citing, a lot. And I think you're probably, I hate to say it, in one of the hardest the hardest businesses to cite among any, right? I mean, certainly if you're doing harvesting, but even just like even a cured meat thing, anything that involves meat is hard to cite. So getting out ahead of that is really important. So you are going to write a site spec, and that's what you're going to get to the economic development people. So how much land, what does the building look like? What are the utility needs? What kind of zoning do you need? And then ask what the approval process is. You want to find out if there's a TIF district or any other special financing mechanisms. Reedsburg had a revolving loan fund that was set up that could help people locating. Those tend to be closely tied to job creation. So yeah, but you want to find out all of that stuff. So I would like to share a little bit here while we can. What's going on with citing for any of you?
I'll share an example, Tara, with the
that'd be
group
great
that we've worked with, and kind
perfect.
of back to the zoning and ordinances. Again, a lot of those are township as well as
Yep.
county specific. And you know, similar to some of your examples of going in front of the planning committee and assisting
Yep.
in preparation of what questions are going to come about, you know, such as traffic on the gravel road. How is that going to impact just the community in a general piece? But zoning and permitting, from my experience, are a big piece to the site specification.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I think another one is this, what I pointed out about Black Earth, that communities are changing, right? And the degree to which the community you're going to is still pretty grounded in agriculture and really understands what we're trying to do, versus more urban situations where people just aren't there, right? The reception you would get in one of those meetings, because you're in a town meeting, right? The public can come. So one thing I want to share with you while some of you are maybe going to chat, there is, I think it's on, oh God, I should find out what it is. There's a show, a television program that's it's like a Netflix series of I think it's like 8. It's called Clarkson's Farm, and it's produced in the UK. And I tell people, if you're in this world that we're in, you have got to watch this thing, because it's so funny and it's so poignant and it's so accurate about agriculture and its interface with communities and food, right? And the guy who hosts it is he's one of the stars of a program called Top Gear, which is the premise of that show is there are these 3 guys that go on they're a bunch of gearheads, and they plop them down in some remote part of Africa and give them these money to buy 3 dune buggies, and they have to drive from, to Tunisia to Morocco in a race or something like that. It's kind of crazy, right? And everybody knows this guy. His name is Jeremy Clarkson, and he made a lot of money, and he bought 1,000 acres in the Cotswolds in England. And he wants to open a store on his farm, and then he wants to open a restaurant on his farm. And this literally happened in the UK, and he had these TV cameras following him around, and they followed him into this council meeting, is what they call them, for their village councils, where they were grilling him about like all this stuff about, well, what about the traffic on the roads, and what are we going to do about this, that, and the other thing, and the riffraff your restaurant is that your farm is going to bring to our community. It's crazy, but it's a great way to prepare for one of those, because this is the kind of stuff. My friend I told you about with the weddings, I told her she needed to watch it, and she was crying. She was laughing so hard, and she called me afterwards and said, it was just like what we went through. Like, So anyway, Clarkson's Farm is what it's called.
We don't have any responses in the chat, but again,
Okay.
please feel free to share through this discussion.
I don't know. I find it hard to believe you haven't had trouble. All right, I'm going to keep going. So the next topic here is staff. So we're in a labor market that is affecting everybody. So Jerome just posted, thank you. We have expansion has a site, zoning approvals, waiting for DOT, Department of something or other, approval of septic and drain field. Yeah, so you're in the process. That's great. And if you have zoning approvals, it means you probably went before the town meeting, Department of Environmental Quality. Okay, cool. So that means you're kind of pretty far down the process. That's great. It's a gauntlet. I guess the other thing I should say is this can take months. So, you know, people are like, well, gung ho, we're going to go and we're going to break ground. Like, yeah, no, you're not. It can take a long time. Again, now, what is the benefit? Why would we buy an existing business? We would buy an existing business for two reasons. One, you don't have to go through all that. They're already up and running. Number two, you do it because they have sales, right? And so hopefully you would take some of that over into your business. So all those months that it takes to site a new plant, you don't have to do. Okay. The third reason to do it is they have some employees. We're in an environment where it is incredibly difficult to staff meat processing facilities. In the consulting work that I do now, I work around the country, a bunch of meat projects for a bunch of reasons. And the teams that I work with, the consultants at Kitchen Table, they're more than just me on the staff, over and over again with our meat, anybody in rural, not just rural, right? This is the big issue, is staff, finding staff, keeping staff, good staff, you know, really tough right now. This environment is really tough. We don't have enough people. Like, we just got to get our heads around this. And I'm like, we have to get our heads around the fact that we need to recognize that our whole food and ag industry relies on immigrants. I mean, let's just be honest, right? And so if we're making it hard for those people to come in, it's hard. Like, I work with companies that and farms that have had the same families come for generations to help, like, pick apples and stuff. Over the last 8 years, they haven't come, right? So what do you do? Well, it's not like, you know, my kids, we didn't raise my kids to go pick apples, which sounds arrogant, but that we're in a situation like this. So if you're thinking about opening a new meat processing facility, you really want to have a plan for labor, right? And what are you going to do to attract it? And how much are you going to pay? I talked to somebody recently because I'm doing a business plan for a startup that is looking to set up a meat processing hub situation. It's complicated, but anyway, in Maryland, so outside of the Washington DC area, but in the part of Maryland that is Appalachia. So the Appalachian region is, you know, you think about West Virginia, but it comes over into Virginia. It also comes over into Maryland. So it's very rural, and it has all of the issues of systemic poverty that you see across all of Appalachia. I just looked at some data for them. The unemployment rate in that county is 3.9%. So a 3.9% unemployment rate is below normal employment, whatever that is. But what that indicates is anybody who is, most people who are qualified to work are working, pretty much everybody. And so how are you going to find other people? It's going to be hard, right? So I encourage you to look at that data, right? Be realistic about this. Where are these people going to come from? The other thing is you really got to think about what you can do in your business to minimize labor, right? I think, and the classic economists talk about substituting capital for labor. Like, what can we do in terms of equipment, automating things so that you don't need as many people? And a lot of those opportunities in meat processing are going to come around cut and wrap and packaging. That's where you need the most people. And that's where there are probably the most opportunities for automation. So I don't think this is going to get any better anytime soon. I'm not on a political soapbox. I wish this wasn't politicized so much, because for us as business owners, I don't know, my whey plant, I don't know how, we had trouble staffing our whey plant because we had to run 24/7, right? And that was hard. Like, we had 3 shifts we had to fill. We started up during the pit of the Great Recession in 2009. It's amazing to even think about that right now. When we opened, we worked with the local workforce development people, and I think we were hiring 10 people, and we had like 50 applications, maybe even more than that, like a huge number of applications. That would never happen now, right? And when I occasionally talk to the people who are there, it's really, really hard for them to staff. So anyway, I think part of the solution to this for you guys is when you're designing your business, I want you to think about labor. And I want you to be intentional about what are you going to automate? Even though you're thinking you're not going to automate anything, you may need to, just to be able to stay in business. So, so think about that, right? Have a plan. For you, this is kind of the broken record. I keep saying this: have a plan, have a plan, have a plan. It's kind of the common theme, right? Like, when you're designing your process, you talk to your process engineers. I want you to ask them, what opportunities are there to substitute some capital for labor, right? Because of all the things we've been talking about. I also want you to think about, so you have 2 kinds of labor requirements. You have production staff, and then you have management. And maybe you have a third one, which is leadership, which is kind of you, right? And I think this start up here and move down. So I mentioned this before when I was talking about sales. Do you like sales or not? There's kind of 2 kinds of organizational leaders in manufacturing businesses. They're the sales and marketing people, and then there's the opsy people. And like, for me, I was definitely more on the sales and marketing. I'll talk to anybody about anything, right? I needed a really strong ops person with me because of that. Opposite could easily be true. And often I see that in food, that they're very ops oriented because we're manufacturers, which is fantastic. Like, don't get me wrong, because you'll be way more efficient because of that. But then you need to complement yourself. So think about complementing yourself. Think about that. Then that helps you figure out what kind of leadership you need. Somebody in here has got to be a really good plant manager. You need that. And is that you? Is that not? And these days, a good plant manager is setting the culture for the organization. And culture is important to retaining employees. It's important to attracting employees. In this labor environment, you can't afford to not have a culture to have a culture that turns over people. If you view people as dispensable now, you're going to have trouble. So you need a leader who can work with people. And then they need to be able to do continuous improvement things to make processes more efficient too, right? it's hard to find those people. Really good plant managers are incredibly hard to find. I mean, if you find somebody like that, they're worth gold. You got to hold on to them because they're so hard to find, right? So now we did that. The next step is the production employees, and have a plan. How many shifts are you going to run? Like try to not have to run 24/7 because, you know, forget staffing a night shift these days. What kind of skills, what kind of salaries? Back to that project in Maryland, I had somebody tell me out there at a processing plant that their starting wage is $22 an hour right now, starting, unskilled, no experience. Now, this is not in downtown DC. It's not because of that. It's because if they don't offer that, they can't attract anybody. Somebody in the economic development entity out there told me that they are offering, I think it was 80,000 to attract a plant manager. Both of those numbers, I think, are pretty accurate for around here. I don't know, Laura, do you have any visibility to that?
Speaking with various processors, I don't have the best average. Again, it's very plant specific, but in recalling from yesterday, kind of on the labor side too, it was shared. There's some organizations and operations that you know, they standardize a $22 per hour. And if you miss a day within 30 days of your first day employment, you will keep that $22 for your remainder.
If you don't miss, yeah.
Yes, if you don't miss. However, if you do accidentally miss a day, you automatically get dropped down to $19 an hour. But yeah, and that's a good thing. Just I think
that's
on our
right,
end
because
that
we
we
were
can.
yeah, no, and we did a version of this yesterday with consultants, and there were some people from departments of agriculture and stuff on there, so we got it. And yeah, they were not like, oh yeah, that number, it doesn't make sense, right? They were saying $22 an hour too. I think a lot of plans I see don't have anything anywhere close to that, right? They're like, oh yeah, minimum wage. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you're not going to find people. So anyway, I think this is an enormous thing right now. Having a plan for how you're going to staff, how you're going to attract and retain the right people is something you just have to do right now. So these are worksheets in here again. So what, like a staffing plan for direct labor, a staffing plan for management, what you put in salaries, people name salaries. This is very helpful because it will probably end up being a worksheet within your financial model, your pro forma, right? It'll have some worksheets in it. One of them ought to be, by the way, your carcass calculator. Another one should be your staffing, so worksheets, so that can feed into your pro forma. Yeah, because it shows that you've really thought this through. So I'd be interested to hear if those of you who are up and running already, how you're handling this labor environment. $80K managerial and $22 for unskilled is similar to construction around us, maybe a good comparable for labor. That's not a bad point, Jerome, that maybe that is the comp. It's a really good point. Because you'll often be working on projects where you don't really have other meat processing facilities around. So we don't really have anybody to go to, and the data won't be there. So you're trying to do a business plan, like, where do you look? And that's a really good point.
I'll add a piece to the convo, and I think a lot of the folks in the Midwest are familiar with this information of our various 5-state region, but a lot of community and technical colleges are completing or assisting in the labor bottleneck and having meat cutting programs to either train the next generation of meat cutters, but additionally, some have just left their corporate jobs because they want to participate in this industry and going through the trainings. But even beyond that, a lot of youth organizations and various school districts are incorporating curriculum, that K through 12 in terms of getting them exposed to, meat science and meat cutting as an additional component. So
I am just laughing at the chat, right? Thank you for posting. So Greg said, we're flexible with staff. Single moms seem to be the best employees. Yeah, single moms, they're taking care of kids. They need their jobs because they need the money. They're going to show up. And then men under 30 are terrible because they don't show up, probably. And Chelsea said, focusing on upgrading equipment. Yeah, as you look to scale and looking for total labor costs, right? So yeah, that's substituting capital for labor, and the place to look is in packaging, I suspect. And Jeff says, we struggle to think that hourly pay is a problem. Some of the lower tier you have, like employees say it is, because most of them are not willing to work 40 hours a week. I need more money, I'll put in more hours is not 25 and under think anymore. Yeah, it's a interesting thing. It's a really interesting thing, because I think those of us who are older, right, like people like me, I'm older, right? We grew up in a really different environment, right? Like there was a lot of times in the 80s where it was really hard to find a job, right? And so we have a different relationship to work, I think, than people who've grown up in this time period over the last 5 years, maybe more, where jobs are relatively plentiful and people can be very picky, and we're not used to that, right? And the culture of younger people is different. And so it's a very different relationship. And then, our generation, very loyal to our employers, like we'll stick through a whole bunch of stuff. Not so much anymore. There's another thing. And I think a lot of this gets back to, there's a lot of competition for labor, right? And so how do we deal with an environment that's really different?
a few more comments.
Yeah, they are eating fast food, right? And yeah, I mean, I get it, Jeff. I hear where you're coming from, right? And it is this incredible shift in generational shift, cultural shift, and the basic brutal facts of the labor market, right? That people have options, and unless something changes, looking into the future, any kind of food processing is going to be like this, that they have options. So the person I told you about who runs the meat processing facility in Maryland said, hey, look, I had to get real. All of these issues that Jeff is raising, he has all those issues, right? And then he said, but I had to get real. Like working in my plant, it's cold in here, right? We're doing what we do with animals, and it's a mess. It's dirty in a way. It's not, I mean, it's clean from a food safety perspective, but there's blood all over the place. And they have to be in suits and all this stuff. Like, they could go down the road and not have any of that. And so I have to be realistic about it. And he's very frustrated. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't talk to anybody running a food plant that's not frustrated about this. And so anyway, the Jerome said, I typically recommend letting prices, including the price of goods and wages, increase with inflation. unstick wages during times of low unemployment. Yeah. Well, here we are in times of low unemployment.
Yep, and then it looks like the last comment kind of, if I'm seeing this correctly, Greg, of just kind of some incentives for labor as
Quick
well.
Trip
And
gift cards.
another good example that Tara and I have heard that in some plants is in terms of the labor pool, that employees work 4 days a week and have Fridays off because they may have an additional job occupation. But then there's another track where individuals are willing to go well over that 40 hours and get incentive and giving a bit of overtime because, you know, just the amount of product that's coming through the plant and being able to get all of the orders complete and, you know, what's the right word, but you know, getting everything done in a daily basis to meet the needs of the industry.
Yeah, and so I think the bifurcation there is that there are some employees who will take any kind of overtime work that you can possibly throw their way. And then there are other people, which would be kind of the older mentality, right? And then there's this other mentality, which is maybe it's because they have other jobs and maybe it's just because they don't want to work that hard. And so they're like, nah, not interested in overtime. In fact, I don't even really want to work I'll work 4 days a week, right? So anyway, I think the message with this is for those of you who are going into this business, really dig into this and think about who is going to be your best employee, how you're going to attract them. And the Quick Trip card, by the way, one of the other things about you're locating businesses that aren't near public transportation, right? And so when gas prices go up, this becomes more problematic. And so the Quick Trip card, I've worked with somebody who did that. And it was very helpful to retaining employees when gas prices went up. Yeah, people really appreciated that.
Appreciate the discussion and comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's a little bit more here. So you're gonna kind of start wrapping all this up. So you've figured out all these steps, right? about your business model. And now you're gonna get documenting this. And by documenting it, I mean you're going to have a specification for your process, for your building. You're going to have a whole bunch of paperwork around site, paperwork. And a lot of this these days is digital, right? But what I recommend you do is get a Dropbox set up because you need a home for all of this. And that may sound like, well, duh, but then people don't do that. And then you have to go dig for everything every time somebody needs it all. So get a Dropbox set up, start putting all of these documents in one place, and then you can make that available to relevant people, whether it be your contractor or whoever. And then you're going to need to start pulling this all together and have a financial model for it, which is going to simulate the financial side of your business. And it's going to take all this stuff that we've been talking about and quantify it and put it into a financial model. And that's how you'll get to know, like, okay, what is our break even? Like, how big do we need to be with the selling to this channel of distribution, and how many customers is that? Like, all of that is getting quantified in that financial model. And you need technical assistance to do that. I mean, if you run a business, you don't have time to do this. If you've never run a business, you don't know what one of these is. And your time is best spent building stuff, relationships, and going to the community and doing all that stuff. It's not building a financial model. So I strongly recommend that you make sure that you have somebody, a technical assistance provider, and I don't know, it could be an AURI, it could be small business development centers, they exist all over the country. Like, find somebody who can do this for you. because you're going to need it. And there are some benchmarks out there. The niche meat processors have some good benchmarking data, and AURI, Laura, you may want to talk about your benchmarking data that's coming.
Absolutely. Yes. So for everyone's awareness, and also to Tara's point is there's a variety of organizations out there. And for example, the niche meat processors, as well as AURI and a few other organizations, are part of a USDA agricultural marketing service technical assistance network. So it is free of charge for any processors, and we have various scopes of work, a lot focused in that business development and technical assistance and supply chain development that we can assist processors, whether they're applying for grants, but even just getting up and running to expansion of their facility or looking at new markets. And that's just kind of a quick debrief of that information. And there's a lot of resources currently out there, as well as resources that here at AURI we are also developing, one of which will be a industry-wide for local and regional meat processing of a benchmarking tool to really understand the metrics and financial performances for processors. And that really goes to that point, and we continually say that is continuous improvement, but most importantly, really looking at your performance on an objective level rather than making rash, subjective decisions for your operations so that everyone can succeed at the end of the day. And of note, again, we have your guys' contact information, and once that is launched, we certainly will be sharing that information with everyone once it comes to fruition sometime this late summer, early fall, and we'll be sure to share that information with everyone.
So it occurs to me, I want to talk something here about so Jeff, you're thinking about wanting to sell your business. That financial model is something you also need to sell a business, right? And people will often just say, okay, well, I have my financial statements, and if there's somebody interested, I'm just going to give them the financial statements, which is true. Like, you can do it that way. But the advantage of going through this exercise and get help to do it for the same reasons that I said for the startup people, is that you have a view of what the future opportunities of your business are. And this is a way to quantify them financially for a prospective buyer. And you think that the prospective buyer knows what those are. They don't really know what they are. And guess what? They're probably going to change it. But when I sold Tara's Way, so we sold to a public company. We sold in 3 years after we started up, which is ridiculously fast. We never thought it would happen that fast. But the reason it happened that fast, ironically, is we started up in the pit of the Great Recession. And we had a defensively unique product that, for all the things we've been talking about, that made it an attractive business. We were sold out for a year. So there's a bunch of things that happened that were really good. We also put together a 5-year model, financial model of what could happen in the future with the business. And that was what we were selling to people. It's not the past. I mean, the past is important, but it's the future, right? Because when somebody buys a business, what are they buying? They're buying the future earnings that are possible with the business. And that future is really important in the sale of a company. So this exercise that we've been talking about of documenting your business model and putting together a financial model, get some technical assistance, same process for you. And guess what? They're going to buy it like the Tara's Way people bought it. The company that bought us is called Omega Protein. And they changed a whole bunch of stuff, right? Don't get me wrong. They changed things, but they bought the company for what they bought it for at the time they bought it, because of what we told them in our projection for the future financial life of the company. So I think that that's part of, it's very much a part of the process of getting your company ready for sale, is helping with that documentation. So you can share that with a prospective buyer. Like, oh yeah, if I were going to buy this business right now, I would invest in the following things. I would do the following things with my sales and marketing. I think, you'll be able to say, this is what what that would look like in terms of financial returns. This is what it, and then they can look at it and say, okay, well, if I have to borrow this much money and I put this much equity in, is the new business going to cash flow, right? They need help documenting that. And I think we did that with the sale of our company, and it was very successful. I've been on multiple boards of companies that have sold. We always did that. So I think that's something for you to think through. Investors, bankers, potential buyers of a company, they care a lot about it, the team, right? You're going to ride off into the sunset. You've been running this business forever. Is this all in your head, and then nobody in the plant can run the company anymore? Or is there a team in place that can run it after you ride off into the sunset? Companies that have a team in place that can run it without you are worth way more than companies that rely on you. And it's hard in these smaller businesses, right? Like, you haven't really had the luxury of a team, right? You were lucky to have one plant manager. But keep that in mind as you're thinking about building your business, because people really do care about the team. And they want, now this is like, you're trying to raise money, right? And this is true not just for investors, it's also true for a bank. They want to know that you're all in. Like, so if you have 3 side gigs, and because they're going to ask for your personal financial statements, they look at them, they say, well, they got 3 side gigs, I don't know how they're going to make this work. Red flag, red flag, red flag, right? So we want you all into this thing. And if you don't have that, if you're not willing to do that, don't be surprised if the bank says no. I don't know if you've all done a lean business model canvas. Those of you who are in the FFI's Fellows Program, you've been using this thing. The reason we use that is this is an incredibly efficient way. It's on one piece of paper, and it has a way to kind of in one place document a lot of what we've been talking about today. So I like this particular version of a lean canvas because of a couple of things here. So this box, unique value proposition and unfair advantage, they kind of come together to be that defensible uniqueness thing that we talked about first thing, that is so important in a food business. So what is it that you're doing that's unique? What is it that makes it hard to copy? That's what you're going to put in here. Going back here, problem solution. This is not your problem. This is your customer's problem. So what is your customer's problem? I can't find halal certified goat meat. My community can't find that. That's the problem. Solution is what you're going to do. Well, you're going to have halal certified goat meat, and we're going to slaughter 3 times a week, and we're going to be supervised by the relevant parties, and we're going to sell it in the following way, right? So customer problem solution is basically should be describing your business. Customer segment. So this is that whole target marketing thing. What are your best customers? And what are they like? Everything you know about who your best customers are going in that box. Channels of distribution. So we talked about that. Like, how are you going to get to market to those best customers? How are you reaching them? I'm going to skip that a minute. Cost structure. So all of this is like anything related to the cost side of your business. You can't know that until you know how much your building is going to cost, you know where you're going to be located, you know what the process equipment is, like you're going to document all of those costs in here. And then you're going to talk about revenue. All right. So what kind of sales can we expect in what year, right? You can block out a little bit of that in here. So it summarizes all of that. And then key metrics are going to be, are often operational metrics that can help you a lot in keeping track of your business development milestones, right? Like I'm going to do this then and this then. You could also view this for your manufacturing as key metrics for manufacturing. So, and as an example, I can tell you this right now, you need to have cost of goods sold as a percent of sales that is 65% or better. If you're higher than that, if your cost of goods sold is 80% of sales, you will not be able to make this business work because your cost structure at the production level is too high to do the rest of the business. So there's some metrics in there that'll come out of that benchmarking data. But that one that I just said is ubiquitous in any kind of manufacturing, including meat. So anyway, you'll identify this. This is also in that PDF folder, really convenient way. And it's meant to be, it's a lean canvas, right? So it comes out of the lean manufacturing philosophy. And that's all about making things streamlined. So they took this idea of a 30, 60, 90 page business plan. Let's get this on one page, let people try it, come back and change it as we learn more, right? So put whatever it is you think on there, and it'll be iterative, and it's meant to be iterative, and it's easy for it to be iterative when it's one page. So that's in there for you. Cool. Where are we? Cool. We're really close. So what's next? One of you, I can't remember who it was, brought up that you've listened to all the podcasts and you really like them. Thanks so much for that. I really miss having that podcast. I hope someday I can get to revive it. Because I think it's been useful for people. So anyway, the podcast though, I mentioned Black Earth Meats and Conscious Carnivore. Bartlett Duran is the owner of that company. I interviewed him, and he talks about what the journey went through. It'll be really interesting for a lot of you, I suspect. Jessica Rusa is an example of somebody who was a farmer who got this idea that she was going to set up a processing facility, and she too has been on quite a journey. And at the time I interviewed her, she was expanding her plan. She's in Indiana. That's a really good one. Ryan at Driftless Provisions makes cured Italian salami in very specific curing environments. He bought the equipment to do it from Italy. And they're in the Driftless region of Wisconsin. So he talks about the journey that he went through to get to a plant that does that kind of value added production. You know, those worksheets are for you. That's why they're in there. So please use them. If you're thinking, geez, I really want to actually roll up my sleeves with somebody who knows what they're doing and get my plan together, that's what boot camp is about. So I am going to be doing an intensive boot camp with AURI. And I think it's when is it? June? May, June, something.
I have
like
to
that.
recall the date, so we'll be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll post it for people, but it's not too far out. And it's going to be a small group, like, because I work one-on-one with everybody in the group, and so we'll get more information out to you about what that looks like. But the idea with that is we're going to take everything we learned in here, plus what I talked about in that workshop about financing, and work with all of you to get your financial plans together, get your business model together, your financial plan together. I can work with anybody from concept persons to somebody who's been in business for 10 years and wants to sell. Like I can do all, or you've been in 50 years, you want to sell. Like I have worked with anybody anywhere in that continuum. So I encourage anybody who really feels like they want to roll up their sleeves and with some really good technical assistance to consider joining that boot camp. Laura.
Fabulous. Yes. So I guess everyone, I hope, took away something from this workshop today. And with that, we're a couple minutes early, which is great because a lot of material was shared. So with that, this concludes our AURI and FFI Part 2 short course workshop within our finance bootcamp, again, focused with meat processors and entrepreneurs, such as all of yourselves that are attending today. And again, want to provide a huge thank you to Tara and her time today. Again, this webinar, short course, workshop, however you would like to phrase it, is presented by both in collaboration with the Food Finance Institute and the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, where our mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. And FFI's mission is to make sophisticated financial technical assistance available to every growing food, beverage, and value-added farm enterprise. As a reminder, for more information on today's program and the work that both of our organizations are in this space of meat and poultry processing, please feel free to go to auri.org, as well as any of the work with FFI. Please visit foodfinanceinstitute.org. And we're looking forward to having all of our participants today join us again in future meat and poultry processing short courses. Again, I in the chat have included myself and Tara's contact information, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any comments, questions within your operations. As well, in the chat, have provided the toolbox packet of various exercises that you can put for your own operation. And lastly, again, this workshop has been recorded, and we will be sharing this information with you afterwards in the very near future, as well as attach the slides, as well as provide that PDF once again for you. So with that, again, sincerely appreciate everyone's participation today, and hope that all of you have a great remainder of your day. So with that, thank you all.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been great to do it. And I look forward to seeing some of you in boot camp.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.